welcome to the channel. If you enjoy captivating stories and intriguing content, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss an update. Also, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing the amazing places our community comes from. Thanks for being here, and let's dive in. The quiet collapse of Fairfield, Manhattan. It began, as many cons do, with a whisper of exclusivity. From a discreet suite on Madison Avenue, Fairfield Manhattan Investment Partners looked nothing like a criminal enterprise. The name evoked old money confidence: polished brass plaque, tastefully muted carpeting, coffee served in bone-white china. Clients felt safe there. They shook hands with Robert Pearson, silver hair, Seville rose suit, a gaze that seemed to weigh and approve each visitor, without ever guessing that his empire rested on vapor. Pearson's pitch was disarmingly simple. He claimed to run a market-neutral fund that eked out modest but steady gains, never flashy, always reliable. 8 to 10% a year, rain or shine. No roller coaster dips, no anxious nights. 4 pension trustees from Connecticut municipalities and French religious orders, that promise glowed like candlelight in a storm. They signed, wired millions, and carried home glossy brochures filled with bland assurances. Behind the brochure copy, however, lay a single overworked spreadsheet, manipulated month after month by Pearson's deputy, Ellen Kotke. She was the real wizard, a former auditor who understood which numbers regulators expected to see and how to nudge them just enough. Each quarter she updated a column called Strategic Offsets that acted as an all-purpose adjustment valve. When the S&P fell, offsets rose. When markets soared, offsets dipped just enough to keep the overall line gentle and upward. It was elegant in its audacity, the sort of fraud invisible precisely because it tried so hard not to impress. For 6 years, Fairfield Manhattan glided under the radar. Pearson cultivated an image of prudent asceticism, declining media interviews and cautioning investors not to boast about their participation. "Quiet money," he murmured, and they nodded, feeling initiated. Each December he mailed out personalized letters, inked signatures, embossed letterhead, reporting another dull but pleasing game. The letters fed the myth until silence itself became a selling tool. If a prospective client pressed for more transparency, Pearson gently advised them to look elsewhere. Most stayed, unnerved by the thought of being expelled from such an exclusive circle. The first hairline crack formed in an unlikely place, a suburban library in Westchester. Julia Sanders, a volunteer treasurer for the Friends of the Library, had persuaded her board to invest a modest endowment with Fairfield. One wet April afternoon she tried reconciling the latest statement with public market data and discovered a mismatch. Fairfield claimed a small positive return in a month every major index had plunged. It was possible, but odd. She sent an email asking for trade confirmations. Pearson replied with cordial brevity, "Our custodial partner maintains these, happy to provide after next audit cycle." Weeks passed. The confirmations never arrived. Sanders, methodical by nature, phoned the custodial bank whose logo appeared on the statements. The receptionist hesitated, transferred her twice, and finally admitted the account number did not match any in their system. Sanders alerted the New York State Attorney General's office. At first the tip landed in a low-priority stack. Billions rarely unravel because of a 5-figure library fund. But a junior investigator named Luis Reina happened to scan the file while researching affinity fraud. The pattern rang a bell. Small, consistent profits, no volatility, vague documentation. Traits shared by a dozen cases he had bookmarked. Reina requested Fairfield's most recent ADV filings and noticed a glaring anomaly. Assets under management jumped from $200 million to $650 million in 1 year, yet staffing and infrastructure remained static. A firm tripling its size without adding analysts or compliance officers. Unlikely. Reina paid an unannounced visit to the Madison Avenue office. What struck him first was the quiet. Only 6 desks, 2 interns, 1 humming printer. For a fund allegedly handling more than $500 million, Fairfield resembled a doctor's waiting room. Pearson greeted him with controlled hospitality, offered herbal tea, then deferred every document request to his chief compliance officer, who was conveniently attending a conference in Zurich. Within days, Reina served a subpoena. Ellen Kotke's reaction was immediate and visceral. Colleagues later recalled her face blanching as she locked herself in a file room. She emerged carrying an external hard drive and a resignation letter. That night she emailed Pearson a single sentence: "I cannot do this anymore." 2 hours later she walked into Raina's office holding the drive like a ticking clock. What she handed over was not a confession so much as a map. Folders labeled Pro Forma, Investor Estimates, Offset Calc. A timeline emerged. Money from new investors filled the gaps left by redemptions from older ones. The strategic offsets, masked trading losses that were never recouped. Fairfield had no market-neutral strategy, no secret algorithm, merely an elaborate pass-through of cash. A classic Ponzi quietly humming behind respectable curtains. Armed with the data, Raina froze Fairfield's accounts before Pearson could move funds offshore. Agents arrived at dawn. Pearson, always dignified, opened the door in a pressed shirt and asked for a moment to turn off the stove. He offered no resistance, only a melancholic nod, as though the arrest were a long-scheduled appointment he had finally kept. The aftermath unfurled slowly. Pension boards convened emergency sessions. Priests in rural France apologized to parishioners. The Westchester Library replaced missing plaques that had been ordered to honor Pearson's promised donation. Losses totaled $480 million. Small beside headline scandals but catastrophic for community funds that could least absorb them. In court, Pearson listened to impact statements with lowered eyes. When his turn came, he spoke softly: "I wanted to protect my clients from chaos." The lie began as a cushion, then became my cage. He received 20 years. Ellen Kotke, cooperating fully, served 18 months and emerged to teach accounting ethics at a city college, her lectures a living exhibit of moral drift. Fairfield Manhattan's plaque is gone now. The suite houses a dermatology clinic where patients fill forms on tablets, unaware of what those walls once concealed. Yet the story lingers, traveling from compliance seminars to dinner tables as a cautionary lullaby: beware the promise of gentle, uninterrupted growth. In markets and in life, smooth lines can hide the steepest cliffs. Carbon shadows in Paris. By dawn, the trading room of Orion Commodities sat 6 floors above the damp pavements of the 8th arrondissement, glowing like a cockpit against the gray Parisian sky. Rows of screens showed flickering bids for something most passers-by had never heard of: European Union emissions allowances, blank digital permits to emit a metric ton of carbon. In April 2009, that market felt new, benevolent, even virtuous. And yet, inside Orion, Matthew Delacroix had already sliced it into a perfect instrument of deceit. He looked nothing like a villain. Slim, diffident, perpetually adjusting the knot of a navy knit tie, Delacroix carried the awkward air of a former math prodigy trying to seem worldly. He spoke softly about liquidity provision, promised clerks he would sponsor their CFA exams, and ordered fruit baskets for the break room. No one imagined that, by the time he reached for an orange, he had often moved 100 million euros across borders and back again, sometimes before lunchtime. The scheme hinged on a bureaucratic wrinkle wider than any vault door. Under European law, cross-border trades of emissions permits were exempt from value-added tax, while domestic sales were not. If a trader imported credits VAT-free, resold them inside France while charging 19.6%, collected the tax, and disappeared before remitting it to the treasury, the gap became instant profit. Authorities called it carousel fraud because the credits spun from country to country faster than regulators could track. Delacroix saw not a merry-go-round but a turbine, one that could mint cash in deafening silence. He needed 2 things: speed and shadows. Speed arrived in the form of a rented fiber line connecting Orion servers to ICE Futures Europe in London, trimming milliseconds off every order. Shadows came from a constellation of shelf companies in Luxembourg, Cyprus, and the Czech Republic, each named after a different constellation: Lyra Trading, Pegasus Capital, Cassiopeia Invest. On paper they were independent counterparties. In reality they answered to a prepaid mobile Delacroix kept deep in his briefcase. Each morning began the same way. An assistant printed a sheet listing the VAT rates of all 27 EU members. Delacroix circled the 2 with the widest spread that day, say buying credits in Estonia at 20%, flipping them in France at 19.6%, pocketing the tax, then parachuting the credits to Belgium where the ride began anew. Money arrived in Orion's BNP Paribas account, then vanished into nomadic IBANs by dusk. To outside eyes it looked like robust arbitrage activity feeding a healthy market. In truth, it was a parasitic whirlpool swallowing public revenue. For months no alarm sounded. France's tax authority, DG5P, processed returns on a leisurely quarterly cycle. By the time one letter reached Orion's mailbox, the firm had already posted the next quarter's record turnover. Meanwhile, environmental journalists celebrated the boom in carbon trading as proof that capitalism could price pollution. Delacroix watched those articles with a faint smile. He was, technically, the Green Revolution's most enthusiastic participant. The first tremor came from a bored intern at a clearinghouse in Amsterdam. Tasked with reconciling serial numbers of permits, she noticed the same batch hopping between 3 firms in a single day: Lyra, Orion, Pegasus, each time tagged with a slightly different price. She flagged the pattern to her supervisor, who shrugged. Probably market making. But the intern persisted, pinging the European Police Office's Financial Crimes Unit. Her email entered Europol's server at 18:07 Central European Time on a Thursday and landed on the desk of Inspector Karl Fosser, a Dane who distrusted coincidences almost as much as he disliked jargon. Fosser ran a query across customs declarations and found a carousel unmistakable even at low resolution. Credits circling France, Belgium, and Germany in 90-minute loops, always reversing direction before VAT deadlines. He drafted a confidential alert and sent it to tax offices across the bloc. Most filed it away. Only FIP's cyber audit team, led by the meticulous Claire Morin, grasped the scale. She matched Orion's reported turnover with bandwidth logs from the Paris Internet Exchange and saw data spikes that made oil majors look sedate. Morin drove to Orion's address on Avenue Matignon at sunrise the next day, hoping to glimpse the beast before it bolted. Inside, the trading floor looked serene, too serene. No ringing phones, no barked orders, just a team in polite, almost monastic concentration. Delacroix welcomed Morin as though hosting a campus tour. Yes, trading volumes had surged. Yes, they serviced pan-European clients. No, he could not disclose identities due to confidentiality clauses. He offered espresso, spoke of sustainability, referenced the Kyoto Protocol with scholarly precision. Morin left with nothing tangible except a curious parting remark. Markets evolve faster than regulators. We see ourselves as pioneers. The line felt rehearsed, like a password to a hidden room. That hidden room materialized 2 weeks later during an unscheduled systems audit. Equipped with a warrant, Morin's team imaged Orion's servers overnight. Beneath legitimate trade logs lay a directory labeled archive_alt, protected by a password derived from Euler's number. When the forensics unit cracked it, they found spreadsheets tracing each permit through as many as 15 jurisdictions, annotated with color-coded cells showing VAT collected versus VAT declared. A final column, starkly titled Skimming, totaled 283 million euros. Delacroix was arrested at Charles de Gaulle while boarding a flight to Dubai, carrying a laptop wiped to factory settings and a passport stamped with recent entries to Latvia, Malta, and Qatar. During interrogation he maintained an air of wounded surprise, claiming Orion merely exploited regulatory inefficiencies and fully intended to settle its obligations. But investigators had already seized email drafts instructing shell company directors to dissolve by month's end. Trials unfolded across Europe, sometimes by video link. Accountants in Prague, brokers in Ghent, a tax consultant in Lyon who confessed after discovering her face on a Europol poster. Delacroix faced a Paris criminal court alone, the last constellation to fall. Prosecutors described a theft large enough to fund the annual budget of the French Ministry of Culture. Defense counsel invoked entrepreneurial spirit. The jury needed only 3 hours. Delacroix received 8 years and an order to repay 156 million euros. Money long ago atomized through trust funds in Mauritius and art purchases in Geneva. In the corridors outside the courtroom, journalists argued whether the carbon market could survive such a wound. Morin answered quietly, "Markets learn." Within months, the EU shifted VAT liability from sellers to buyers, making carousel fraud far harder. Yet, for France, the loss remained: a public service denied, a hospital wing unbuilt. Today the offices of Orion stand empty, their fiber cables ripped out, their view of the Élysée Palace untroubled by screens. Sometimes at night, cleaners say they hear a faint electronic chirp, as if servers were still pinging distant constellations that no longer exist. It may be nothing, echoes and metal racks, or perhaps a reminder that in modern finance, even thin air can be stolen if stamped with the right bureaucratic code. The canvas that never dried. When autumn settled over Berlin in 2017, the Kreuzberg art scene throbbed with late-night openings and soft techno beats drifting from converted factories. Among the district's brick facades, Gallery Eisenstadt glowed like a beacon of refined calm. Tall windows, white walls, and discreet brass letters spelling EISENSTDT promised serious culture rather than club noise. Visitors who stepped inside found minimalist pedestals, quiet spotlights, and resting in measured isolation, a newly rediscovered, expressionist masterpiece signed E. Nold. Gregor Eisenstadt, the gallery's founder, cultivated understatement. He wore tailored charcoal suits, spoke in slow musical German, and greeted collectors with a slight bow. His pitch never pressed, it insinuated. "Berlin still keeps secrets," he would murmur, gesturing to the canvas splashed with furious yellows and indigos, and sometimes they surface when the city is ready to see them. Within weeks, a Swiss financier paid €3.2 million for the piece, transferring the money into an escrow account that Eisenstadt suggested for discretion. The sale lit a quiet frenzy. Over the next 6 months, Gallery Eisenstadt unveiled 4 more works, 2 attributed to Paula Modersohn-Becker, 1 to Franz Marc, and a small, haunting portrait supposedly by Kathy Kollwitz. Each arrived, Eisenstadt claimed, from the same source, a reclusive Bavarian family whose patriarch had hidden his collection from both Nazis and communists. Provenance documents appeared impeccable. Brittle receipts from 1925, insurance rider stubs from 1938, even a black and white photo of the patriarch posing beside a stacked barn loft of canvases. Prices climbed and buyers lined up. A Monaco heiress flew in on a snowy Thursday, tasted a single sip of rooibos in Eisenstadt's office, and wired €5 million before boarding her return jet. A Danish museum, eager to strengthen its German holdings, mortgaged a wing to secure the Franz Marc. Reviewers spoke of a miraculous pipeline of modernist light. Headlines wondered how many treasures still slept in Bavarian attics. Yet a single voice of doubt pierced the applause. Dr. Leonie Hartmann, a conservator at the Germanisches National Museum, examined high-resolution catalog photos and noticed something odd. Microscopic craquelure patterns, those spiderweb fissures old paint develops, looked eerily uniform across 3 different canvases. Real aging fractures danced to each painting's unique surface tension. These cracks felt printed, almost stylized. Hartmann emailed the museum's acquisitions board urging caution. Her message received polite thanks and was filed away. Undeterred, she contacted Europol's Art Crimes Unit, where investigator Mark Besson fielded her call amid a pile of trafficking dossiers. At first the story sounded like countless others. But Besson's curiosity sparked when Hartmann mentioned the seller's preference for escrow accounts routed through a Liechtenstein trust. He had seen that pattern in a string of antiquities scams 2 years earlier. Besson flew to Berlin under the guise of a private buyer representing a French family office. Eisenstadt welcomed him after hours, lights dimmed, soft cello playing from hidden speakers. The gallerist unveiled another supposed Nold, its pigments so fresh they seemed damp. Besson asked about scientific verification. Eisenstadt smiled, tapping a binder of provenance papers. "History, not chemistry, authenticates art," he pronounced. Still, he consented to a formal condition report once the family releases the piece. When Besson left, he tucked a used espresso cup into his briefcase. The rim bore Eisenstadt's fingerprints. Within days, a lab in The Hague dusted the print and matched it to a 2009 Italian warrant for a man named Luca Esposito, once arrested for forging Futurist paintings in Naples, released on bail and vanished. Armed with probable cause, Besson petitioned German authorities for a joint raid. A magistrate signed the order at dawn. Police vans rolled toward Kreuzberg just as Eisenstadt unlocked the gallery for a private viewing. Officers moved through the glass doors in a silent wave, sealing exits, covering canvases with evidence cloths. Eisenstadt stood motionless, as if someone had suddenly switched off the music in his head. Downstairs, the storage room told the fuller tale. Shelves held jars of modern pigment, tubes of commercial acrylics, and a humidifier set high to keep paint pliable, so the canvases, when touched during showings, felt convincingly supple, not brittle. Boxes of pre-creased parchment carried simulated 1920s watermarks ready for fresh provenance letters. Under a work lamp lay a half-finished canvas, the sinuous form of a blue horse, Franz Mark in embryo, paint still glistening. The Bavarian family existed only as a folder of staged photographs shot on Eisenstadt's phone against a rented farmhouse backdrop. In the gallery lobby, officers unrolled the seized masterpieces one by one. Under UV light, modern optical brighteners in the white paint fluoresced like neon, chemicals unknown to pre-war artists. The deception's elegance collapsed into banality. News broke by midday. Collectors who had proudly hung Eisenstadt pieces scrambled to hide them. Insurance firms dialed experts to evaluate losses. Some policies excluded forgeries outright. The Danish Museum cordoned off an entire gallery wing behind black curtains, shame muffled in the hush of echoing footsteps. Eisenstadt, or Esposito, maintained icy composure through interrogation. "Art is belief," he said, "and belief is voluntary." Prosecutors charged him with fraud, money laundering, and forgery of cultural property. Evidence of 47 million euros in illicit proceeds surfaced across accounts in Liechtenstein, Malta, and Hong Kong. Courtroom spectators gasped when canvases were wheeled in, still beautiful yet suddenly mute, artwork stripped of lineage, reduced to painted fabric. Dr. Hartmann testified softly, explaining cracked patterns and anachronistic titanium dioxide traces. A juror later said her calm description felt more damning than the loudest accusations. The verdict: 11 years in prison, forfeiture of assets, and a mandate to fund art forgery research once legitimate funds were recovered. A poetic sentence he received with a faint, ironic bow. The Kreuzberg Gallery stands dark now, its brass letters removed. 4 months tourists peered through dusty windows expecting some avant-garde installation, not realizing the emptiness was final. Yet the scandal nudged the art world toward greater diligence. Museums introduced mandatory pigment analysis. Collectors demanded isotope tests before wiring fortunes. And Dr. Hartmann, once brushed aside, now leads a task force training customs agents to spot fresh paint beneath century-old signatures. On quiet evenings, neighbors claim the gallery's blank facade seems to shimmer, as if phantom canvases still hang inside, their colors wet, eternally waiting to dry. Perhaps they will, someday, when belief alone is no longer enough to sell a dream. The Ghost Fleet of Belfast. Fog drifts over Belfast Lough most mornings, softening the dry docks into ghostly silhouettes. In 2018, those outlines became props for a vision spun by Dominic "Dom" Mallory, founder of North Atlantic Maritime Leasing. Mallory, 42, spoke with the quick poise of a former city trader and the nautical ease of a yacht club commodore. His pitch was elegant. With global shipping lines short of capital, investors could buy newly built container vessels, lease them out at fixed rates, and pocket steady, market-proof returns. "Ships are floating real estate," he liked to say, "and ports never sleep." North Atlantic's offices overlooked the Titanic quarter, steel beams, glass foyers, and the romance of shipbuilding heritage. Visitors saw scale models of feeder vessels arrayed on walnut shelves, each bearing a brass plaque. MV Carrickfergus, MV Stormont, MV Giant's Causeway. Brochures promised 8% annual yield, capital repayment in 7 years, and the security of hard asset collateral registered under UK tonnage tax. Pension trustees from Leeds, dentists from Oslo, a widowed teacher from County Down, all felt reassured when Mallory guided them past panoramic windows and pointed to dry dock cranes. "Your money becomes one of those," he murmured. Behind the models, though, sat a single spreadsheet curated by Mallory's operations head, Fergus Doyle. Each time money arrived, Doyle colored a cell green, then rerouted the funds through a Guernsey nominee account. From there the cash traveled to Panamanian corporations that, on paper, owned the vessels. In truth, the ships existed only as design files inside a Hamburg naval architecture firm. Deposits on real hulls were never paid. Yet every quarter, investors received glossy statements showing charter income wired from fictitious liner companies, Baltic Blue Logistics, Nordic Meridian Shipping, names invented during a late-night whiskey session. For 18 months, North Atlantic hummed. Mallory hosted champagne receptions on the deck of a retired Coast Guard cutter, toasting Irish shipbuilding's renaissance. Local press applauded and expected 200 dockyard jobs. Belfast Harbour commissioners, eager for headlines, granted Mallory discounted berthing rights once the first vessel arrived. That arrival date slid, first by weeks, then by seasons, supplier delays, Chinese yard congestion, Brexit-related paperwork. Excuses sounded plausible amid global trade jitters. The gentle unraveling began with a boilerplate email. Maeve Quinn, an accountant at a Midlands pension fund, sought confirmation that her client's £6 million had purchased shares in MV Stormo. She requested the International Maritime Organization (IMO) number. Doyle replied with a 7-digit string, 9913842. Quinn, methodical by nature, checked the IMO database. The number belonged to a Philippine-flagged bulk carrier scrapped in 2012. She emailed again, no answer. Quinn's compliance officer escalated to the UK Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. An analyst there, Julian Carter, cross-referenced North Atlantic's entire fleet. Every IMO number traced to a vessel long sunk, scrapped, or still actively trading under unrelated owners. Carter phoned the Belfast Harbour master, who admitted he had never seen paperwork for a North Atlantic arrival. The pieces clicked. A phantom fleet financed by very real pounds and euros. Carter alerted the National Crime Agency's Economic Crime Team. Investigator Asha Patel drove up from London under grey December skies. She walked North Atlantic's corridors posing as a prospective Dutch investor. Mallory greeted her with breezy warmth, spinning tales of carbon-efficient hull coatings and sulfur cap compliance. When Patel asked to tour a completed vessel, Mallory claimed the Giant's Causeway was conducting sea trials off Qingdao, but promised a video call with the captain. He flicked open FaceTime on his phone. The connection failed twice, then displayed a pixelated man in a wheelhouse. Patel noted the man's uniform bore a logo of a Thai ferry company. That evening, Patel obtained a magistrate's order to image North Atlantic servers. Forensic technicians found Photoshop files layering different ship names onto the same stock photograph. A pivot table titled Dividend Planner revealed money moving in concentric circles. New investor funds covering coupon payments to older clients. Total intake, £112 million, actual shipyard spend, £0.6 million, deposits later refunded when milestones were missed. Patel executed coordinated account freezes at dawn. Mallory, arriving in a navy trench coat, paused at the sight of uniformed officers, then attempted a calm nod. There must be some misunderstanding. He was led past the walnut shelves. Investigators stickered evidence tags onto each model, their brass plaques suddenly absurd. News spread fast. Retirees refreshed inboxes, finding apology emails timed 1 minute before the freeze, classic marker of panic. Some rushed to North Atlantic's locked doors, pressing cheeks to the glass, seeing only their reflections. Court proceedings convened at Belfast Crown Court the following spring. Prosecutors outlined a Ponzi masked as maritime finance. Leases invented, charters forged, desktop vessels paraded as collateral. Mallory's defense claimed he'd been over-optimistic, insisting hulls would have materialized if regulators had not intervened. But Doyle, facing a shorter sentence for cooperation, testified that the plan was fraudulent from day one. He described drafting fake Lloyd's Register certificates while Mallory recited sea shanty lyrics to lighten the mood. Victim statements carried a quieter weight. A couple postponing retirement, a university endowment shelving scholarships, a dockyard welder who had quit a steady refit job expecting North Atlantic contracts. Listening from the dock, Mallory seemed to shrink with each account, as though stripped of the aura that had once made empty berths look full. The verdict arrived after 6 hours. Guilty on charges of fraud by false representation and money laundering. Mallory received 14 years, Doyle 7. Confiscation orders chased assets in Monaco apartments, vintage scotch, and a 62-foot Sunseeker yacht aptly named Mirage. Recovery may cover barely half the losses. Belfast Harbour removed North Atlantic signage. The office windows overlook the same fog-bound cranes, but the models are gone, shelves bare. Occasionally, gulls wheel above the water, and port workers recall the months when phantom ships supposedly neared the lock, laden with promise. They never appeared, yet for a while their imagined hulls were vivid enough to draw millions. Today, a decal on the empty glass door still shows the outline of North Atlantic's compass logo. Faded but stubborn, a silhouette that sunlight has yet to erase. Passers-by hardly notice, yet anyone who pauses long enough might sense an echo, the hush of tidal water, the clink of champagne flutes, and a salesman's voice assuring that ports never sleep, while his fleet never sailed. The Ohio Ledger. Caraway, Ohio, sat between sprawling cornfields and a muddy bend of the Scioto River, the sort of Midwestern town where porch lights clicked off by 10 and the bank clock downtown still chimed the hour. In that quiet grid of elm-lined streets, the county treasurer's office occupied a red brick courthouse built when Rutherford B. Hayes still filled newspapers. Most residents associated the office with license plate renewals, not the pulse of public money, and even fewer could name its deputy director, Helen Briscoe. Helen favored muted blouses and sensible shoes, a style so unremarkable it rendered her nearly invisible. Each dawn she arrived before anyone else, slipping a thermos of black coffee beside her monitor, then unlocking the beige metal cabinet that housed payroll records for every teacher, firefighter, and road crew worker on the county rolls. By 8 she had already reconciled the previous day's deposits and queued electronic transfers so precisely that auditors in Columbus once called the treasurer's books a model of provincial discipline. This reputation suited Helen. Precision was her camouflage. 3 years earlier, the county had adopted a new payroll platform marketed by Metro Trust Solutions, a regional fintech promising seamless integration and fraud-proof controls. Helen attended the vendor's training in a Cincinnati hotel ballroom. There she noticed an overlooked feature. Manual override fields buried 4 clicks deep, allowing an administrator to adjust net pay before disbursement. During the demo, a Metro Trust rep mentioned the fields only to note they were rarely used outside emergency bonuses. Helen memorized the navigation path. Her first experiment was modest, a $43 increase to her own salary, buried inside a January snow removal stipend. No red flags rose. Encouraged, she constructed a phantom employee, Miles Carter, bridge maintenance. She assigned him a middling wage and filed a W-4 using a vacant P.O. box on the county's edge. Payroll ran smoothly, funds landed in a new checking account, and Helen transferred them onward to a prepaid debit card. After 2 cycles she deleted Miles, then created Rowena Dale, substitute teacher, repeating the steps with minor variations so pattern detection software would find nothing rigid to grasp. Months drifted by. Roads were salted, ball games played, church bells rung. The courthouse clock kept perfect time while Helen siphoned imperfect amounts. Never round numbers, always amounts that aligned with overtime or hazard differentials. By the end of year 2 she had drawn nearly $600,000, yet the general ledger reconciled to the penny each quarter. Supervisors praised her diligence and granted her an unsought raise. In May, a local journalist named Ben Morales began assembling a human interest series on public servants behind the scenes. One rainy Tuesday he arrived at Helen's office, recorder in hand, asking for an interview about the hidden custodians of county stability. Helen obliged politely but offered little flavor. Ben noticed her answers were precise yet bloodless, as though she recited ledger columns rather than living memories. He ended the meeting with a soft joke about spreadsheets. Helen smiled, but the smile stopped at her eyes. Days later, Ben requested payroll data under Ohio's public records statute, seeking to chart wage trends for his article. Helen prepared the files herself, confident no trace of phantom employees remained. She erred only in haste. While scrubbing identifiers, she overlooked a single entry, an address line linking Grant and Supply, P.O. Box 194. The same P.O. Box handled Miles Carter's defunct paychecks and now received monthly vendor maintenance reimbursements. Ben, curious, keyed the box number into the USPS business directory. It belonged not to a vendor but to Helen Briscoe. Ben's intrigue sharpened. He examined wire transfer logs returned with his records request and spotted 12 identical amounts, $4612.27, paid to Grant and Supply on the 1st of each month, labeled road grit procurement. A quick drive to the county garage revealed pallets of grit sourced from a different distributor entirely. When Ben inquired, the garage foreman laughed. "We haven't used Granton in years," he said. "Thought they went under." Ben drafted a memo detailing his findings and emailed it to Chief Treasurer Marcus Dean, a cautious man who disliked surprises. Dean summoned Helen the next morning. Rain hammered courthouse windows as she took a seat opposite his oak desk. He slid the memo across the surface. Helen read in silence, cheeks draining of color. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the patter of rain and the courthouse clock striking 10. Dean asked whether she wished to explain. Helen folded the paper with surgical care, met his stare, and spoke calmly. "There are discrepancies," she said, "but they are rectifiable." Dean, older and slower to anger than most, replied, "Helen, this looks like theft." She said nothing more. Dean dialed the state auditor. Deputies arrived before noon. Search warrants exposed the architecture of her deceit. For shell companies registered to her maiden name, rotating P.O. boxes, prepaid cards feeding a brokerage account that had quietly ballooned to just over $2.1 million. Investigators found no luxury cars, no hidden condo on Lake Erie, only a modest ranch house, a stack of antique mystery novels, and a half-finished jigsaw puzzle of Monet's water lilies on her kitchen table. The money sat mostly untouched, as though accumulation, not spending, had been the objective. Court proceedings unfolded in Columbus under fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, lending the courtroom an oddly surreal glow. Prosecutors depicted Helen as a meticulous spider weaving invisible silk. Defense counsel argued she intended to repay the county, that she had tested controls to expose vulnerabilities. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on 24 counts of fraud and aggravated theft. When asked if she wished to address the court, Helen declined. She received 8 years in a women's correctional facility and an order to forfeit every cent. Back in Caraway, townspeople gathered at Dixon's Diner to parse the scandal. Some felt betrayed. Others marveled at the audacity cloaked in plain wool cardigans. The county implemented dual signature overrides and biometric login requirements, measures meant to reassure, yet the courthouse clock now carried a faint undertone of doubt with each chime. Ben Morales published his series, though the tone shifted from celebration to cautionary tale. In his final paragraph, he observed that trust, like public money, demands line-by-line verification. On a shelf beside his desk, he kept a clipping of Helen's booking photo. Not as trophy, he claimed, but as a reminder that the most alarming frauds often rustle no louder than turning pages in a ledger. He wondered occasionally what became of Helen's jigsaw puzzle, whether the lilies were ever completed, or whether the pieces remained perpetually scattered, unfinished, quietly accusing the hands that placed them. The frozen ledger of Oslo. Snow had already crusted the tram rails when the banner first appeared above Karl Johans gate. Viking Block, Norway's safest crypto haven. The logo, a stylized longship carved in neon blue, promised both heritage and futurism. Beneath it stood Sindre Halvorsen, 33, fleece jacket zipped to his chin, greeting passers-by with steaming paper cups of glögg and a pledge of guaranteed 14% annual yield, paid monthly, no lockups. Oslo's winter shoppers, lulled by mulled wine and the aura of Nordic efficiency, listened. Halvorsen's backstory glimmered with just enough detail to sound verifiable. He said he had coded trading bots while conscripted in the Royal Norwegian Navy, then fine-tuned them during a stint at a Stockholm hedge fund. Those bots, now christened Frostfire, allegedly scanned global exchanges for micro-arbitrage opportunities, price gaps lasting milliseconds, invisible to humans but ripe for Turing-fast code. Depositors could choose from 3 tiers: Svalbard, Lofoten, Nordkapp, each with slightly higher yields. Halvorsen's mantra floated across every ad: "We don't speculate, we arbitrage." Oslo's tech media embraced him as a hometown Elon. Dagens Næringsliv devoted a Saturday spread to Viking Block's hydro-powered server farm, in Telemark, illustrated with misty drone shots of waterfalls that, in reality, powered a public hydro station kilometers away from any data center. Meanwhile, deposits swelled. University professors moved pension side pots. A Trondheim fishing cooperative diverted cash reserves. Venture capitalists, embarrassed by missing the boom in neighboring Sweden, wired 7-figure sums overnight. Within 9 months, Viking Block claimed 2.1 billion kroner under management. The returns arrived right on schedule. Statements, rendered in a soothing slate-gray font, showed balances nudging upward with metronomic calm. Every increase was accompanied by a one-line trade blotter, citing buy-sell pairs across Binance, Bitstamp, and a Belize-registered exchange called Aquax. Few clients had ever heard of Aquax, yet the name sounded pleasantly maritime, so no one probed. Doubts surfaced not from an investor but from Hanna Ostberg, an information security consultant who freelanced for Norwegian tax authorities. While mapping domestic crypto flows for anti-laundering compliance, she noticed Viking Block wallets blasted funds into Aquax nearly every Friday evening, then pulled almost identical sums back by Monday morning. No profit, no directional change, just a circular glacier melt. Ostberg pinged a counterpart at Finanstilsynet, Norway's financial watchdog, asking whether Viking Block had filed requisite risk reports. The answer came minutes later. They claim exemption as a technology service, not a financial institution. The loophole felt wide enough for a longship. Ostberg dug deeper. Aquax's domain was registered to a co-working mailbox in Belize City. Its SSL certificate renewed every 3 weeks, a common tell of burner sites. She opened the exchange's supposed order book. Trading pairs flickered but never changed depth, as if frozen gifs. Screenshots piled up. Her curiosity sharpened into alarm. She drafted a formal memorandum and climbed 2 floors to the tax agency's enforcement directorate. The director, wary of headline misfires, forwarded the memo to Økokrim, Norway's economic crime unit. Detective Lars Engen drew the case. Stoic, fond of long silences, he preferred hard drives to hunches. He subpoenaed the commercial power supplier in Telemark. Electricity usage at the advertised server shed matched that of a single-family cabin, not an algorithmic mine. He then requested logs from Oslo's main internet exchange point. Viking Block's advertised petabytes of daily trade resolved to a drizzle of traffic, mostly PDF statements and marketing emails. On a slate afternoon in late February, Engen and 2 auditors walked into Viking Block's glass-lidded office near Aker Brygge. Halvorsen welcomed them with a barista's smile. "Regulators keep us sharp," he quipped, ushering them to a conference room where an abstract oil painting of fjords shimmered in corporate blues. Engen asked for a live demonstration of Frostfire. Halvorsen obliged, typing commands into a laptop projected onto the wall. Numbers streamed, exchanges scrolled, balances toggled. A symphony of motion. Yet Engen, whose own screen ran packet-sniffing software, recorded hardly any outbound data. The demo was looping a local file. Politely, Engen requested cold wallet addresses and private key signing to verify holdings. Halvorsen's confidence cracked. A vein pulsed at his temple. He promised keys later today, once his compliance officer arrived. There was no compliance officer, only a receptionist on contract whose badge read intern. Within hours, Økokrim secured freezing orders on every wallet linked to Viking Block. The balances totaled 140 million kroner, barely 7% of client deposits. The rest had sluiced through mixers into shell companies in Estonia, then onto property purchases in Alicante and a Canadian lakeside lodge booked under Vitravne AS, a holding company whose sole board member was Halvorsen's 69-year-old aunt. Halvorsen was arrested at Gardermoen Airport while attempting to board a flight to Dubai, carrying a Ledger hardware wallet and enough winter kroner to suggest no return ticket. In custody, he oscillated between indignation and evangelism, insisting Frostfire did work but required exotic liquidity venues regulators didn't understand. Investigators later pried open the wallet. It contained meme coins worth less than a used snowboard. Trial began amid the pale light of an Oslo summer that feels more like extended dusk. Prosecutors projected flowcharts showing money cycling between investor accounts and Aquax before fragmenting into anonymized shards. Halvorsen's defense argued that abrupt regulatory actions had spooked counterparties and caused a liquidity mismatch, a run on the bank, not a robbery. But a forensic coder demonstrated how Aquax's trading engine was a fork of open-source software left unmodified. Every order book entry was injected via a cron job reading from a CSV file called mockdata.csv. Victim testimony provided the human chill. A retired nurse had moved her grandson's college fund to Viking Block after reading an influencer's post. A Sami reindeer cooperative admitted the promised yield had seemed a hedge against unpredictable winters. They spoke calmly, almost apologetically, as Norwegians do, yet each sentence echoed against the courtroom's timber rafters. The verdict: guilty of aggravated fraud and money laundering. Sentence: 10 years plus restitution of 1.9 billion kroner, a sum as elusive as the arbitrage gains once promised. As Halvorsen was led away, he glanced toward the gallery. For a moment, the neon longship of his adverts seemed to flicker behind his eyes, sailing into a frozen night that no blockchain could thaw. Viking Block's office now sits empty, light reflecting off unused standing desks. Occasionally tourists mistake the space for part of the Nobel Peace Center next door and peer through the glass. All they see is the abstract fjord painting, still bright, still pointless, like a ledger full of numbers that never truly belong to anyone at all. The paper orchard of Vermont. The Green Mountains turn crimson in October, and tourists flock to Vermont for cider, maple syrup, and postcard serenity. In 2021, many of those visitors paid by credit card at roadside farm stalls owned, on paper, by a cooperative called Champlain Heritage Orchards. The co-op's website displayed drone shots of weathered barns, rust-red silos, and broad cider presses dripping with amber foam. It boasted 37 member farms and a promise to put real cash back into rural hands. The imagery felt so wholesome that even the state treasurer's office invested pension money in its community agribond. None of the barns existed. Behind the photo stood Kevin Mallard, a 38-year-old CPA who had once audited small dairy operations before discovering that spreadsheets offered a harvest richer than soil could. Mallard's idea was simple: fabricate a network of micro-businesses that qualified for pandemic relief, green energy grants, and low-interest USDA loans, then channel the money into a single, invisible barrel. He began with Shells, LLCs named after real villages: Orwell Apple Works, Addison Sunrise Farms, Moncton Hollow Produce. Each entity received an employer identification number, a Vermont mailing address rented via digital mailbox, and a logo sketched by a freelance designer who never asked what the apples actually tasted like. Mallard then wrote self-addressed invoices. Orchard A sold juice concentrate to Orchard B, Orchard B sold spent pomace pellets to Orchard C supplied biomass to Orchard A. The circular trading fabricated just enough revenue for each LLC to justify lines of credit. The cash crop arrived when Mallard learned about the USDA Value-Added Producer Grant, which reimbursed up to $250,000 per farm for marketing and processing upgrades. He filled out 37 applications, copy-pasting the same business plan, tweaking only varietal names, Macoun, Empire, Northern Spy, to satisfy a grant reviewer's craving for local color. 26 applications cleared. Federal funds began dripping into bank accounts opened at a single Burlington branch where the manager, overwhelmed by pandemic workload, approved everything that carried a legitimate EIN and notarized signature. Mallard needed the public to believe in his orchards, so he leased a shuttered cider mill off Route 7. On Saturdays he brought in a rented food truck, pallets of supermarket apples, and a portable press. Instagram photos captured smiling tourists holding steaming donuts beside wooden crates stenciled Champlain Heritage. Influencers tagged the location. Travel blogs listed it among Vermont's 10 hidden cider gems. Trouble sprouted in a cubicle 250 miles south, at the Office of Inspector General for the USDA. Analyst Priya Deshpande ran a routine cross-check of GPS-tagged farm acreage against grant recipients. 16 of Mallard's orchards plotted to the middle of Lake Champlain. 4 more overlapped Interstate 89. Deshpande, curious, called the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. A clerk recalled seeing Champlain Heritage's newsletter: pretty pictures, no phone number. Deshpande requested drone imagery from the National Agriculture Imagery Program. The supposed orchard in Moncton was a marsh. Addison Sunrise Farms was a gravel pull-off popular with truckers. She flagged the file for field inspection and drove north with 2 agents just as the first November snow powdered the valleys. They visited the show mill on Route 7. A handwritten sign read, "Closed for seasonal maintenance." Through dusty glass they saw only empty racks and a single cardboard barrel labeled, "Sample Pellets." Deshpande phoned the number on the co-op's website. It routed to voicemail in a soothing baritone, Mallard, inviting callers to leave a note for the orchardists. That afternoon, the agents served subpoenas on the Burlington Bank. Statements revealed identical transfer patterns. Grant money in 80% wired to Maple Leaf Consulting LLC, Mallard again, 20% left behind to pay token property taxes on tiny land parcels he had bought at delinquent auctions for $500 each. Fraud hid in plain sight, camouflaged by Vermont's own patchwork deeds. Mallard sensed frost but misread it as morning dew. While agents compiled evidence, he pitched Series B agribonds online, touting audited 18% growth. A Boston wealth manager asked for the audit opinion letter. Mallard, agile, opened Microsoft Word and pasted paragraphs from a real KPMG report, swapping logos for a fictitious Green Mountain Audit Group. He forgot that audit opinions list partner names. The partner he invented, Hannah Baird, was also the CFO on Every Orchard LLC. Deshpande's team moved fast. They froze accounts, then coordinated with state police for a dawn arrest. Mallard was found in a converted barn loft he called Command Row, walls papered with flowcharts of LLC arrows looping like vines. He had just booked a one-way ticket to Costa Rica and packed 3 hard drives in a box labeled Tax Records 2022. Trial convened in Burlington's federal courthouse the next summer. Prosecutors unrolled aerial maps where Orchard should have stood. Jurors saw blue water and asphalt. A forensic accountant demonstrated how Mallard laundered $19.4 million through crypto exchanges before buying a ski chalet in Stowe and a fractional share of a small jet. Mallard's defense invoked Vermont's agricultural startup culture and blamed pandemic paperwork chaos. But Deshpande's testimony, calm, methodical, sliced through any romance. After 5 days, the jury returned guilty on wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. Mallard received 12 years and an order to repay funds to the United States and the people of Vermont. The grant office rewrote its vetting rules, adding satellite verification and surprise site visits. Today the shuttered cider mill stands quiet, its once photo-friendly crates stacked in a corner, paint peeling. Route 7 travelers still slow, puzzled by the Champlain Heritage sign fading under moss. Locals say if you stop at dusk, you can smell leftover apples fermenting in the cold, ghost cider from a harvest that never was, sweet on the tongue yet sour in the ledger. The Phantom Pharmacies of Miami. Southwest of downtown Miami, on a Sunday strip of Coral Way, sat Buena Vida Drugs, a beige storefront wedged between a bail bond office and a tire shop. Its blinds were always half-drawn, its neon open sign forever flickering. Neighborhood residents rarely ventured inside. Those who did reported empty shelves, a lone cashier scrolling her phone, and the faint medicinal scent of rubbing alcohol. Yet Buena Vida billed Medicare and private insurers more than $1.8 million a month for specialty cancer medications that never crossed its threshold. The architect of this quiet torrent was Clara Mendoza, 47, a former hospital billing clerk with a memory for codes and a talent for charm. After leaving her job amid layoffs, she noticed something curious. Insurance systems would reimburse pharmacies for expensive injectables within 72 hours, often before any verification took place. If a pharmacy filed claims for drugs dispensed to homebound patients and later voided those claims, the insurers might issue recoupment letters, but only after weeks or months. Mendoza wondered how much money could be skimmed during that float. She began small. Renting an abandoned nail salon, she registered Buena Vida with the Florida Board of Pharmacy, listing her elderly uncle, a retired dentist in Puerto Rico, as nominal supervising pharmacist. She hired 2 part-time clerks who knew little about pharmaceuticals but plenty about keeping quiet. Using stolen physician credentials purchased on the dark web, Mendoza submitted her first batch of claims. 20 vials of an immunotherapy drug for Carlos Ortega, a patient who existed only as an algorithmic blend of Social Security data scraped from public records leaks. Payments hit Buena Vida's account 3 days later, $92,000. The rush proved irresistible. Mendoza replicated the model across Miami-Dade, setting up 4 more storefronts. Suncoast Scripts in Little Havana, Ocean Star RX near Hialeah, Palmetto Meds in Kendall, and Flamingo Pharmacy out by the airport. Each shop looked legitimate at a glance. Computerized cash registers, laminated OSHA posters, a perfunctory shelf of aspirin, and each funneled 7-figure reimbursements into holding companies with tropical names. She laundered the proceeds through a network of ATM-owned cash businesses. Vape lounges, used car lots, a salsa dance studio that rarely opened its doors. For nearly 2 years, the Phantom Pharmacies glided beneath regulatory radar. Inspectors, hamstrung by pandemic staffing shortages, announced site visits weeks ahead. Mendoza simply stocked borrowed pill bottles on the counters and hired an out-of-work pharmacist to greet them. The inspectors left impressed by her meticulous binder of controlled substance logs. Logs she generated with a macro that randomized lot numbers just enough to appear human. What she didn't foresee was a data analyst named Noah Kim at an insurer's special investigations unit in Minneapolis. Kim studied reimbursement flows like weather patterns. One humid August evening he noticed that 5 small Miami pharmacies, all incorporated within months of one another, were billing extraordinary volumes of the same high-cost oncology drugs, yet none reported a single refill request. Even more suspicious, the prescriptions originated from physicians scattered across Texas, Illinois, and Georgia, none of whom had hospital privileges in Florida. Kim plotted the pharmacies on a map and overlaid cancer incidence statistics by zip code. The visual screamed anomaly. The densest drug spending occurred in areas with the lowest reported cancer rates. He escalated his findings to a multi-insurer fraud task force, and the name Buena Vida lit up in bold red across several ledgers. Enter Special Agent Marisol Delgado of the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. Delgado, patient and unflappable, requested test claims, instructing cooperating insurers to delay payments while appearing to approve them. Buena Vida's next round of invoices, $340,000 worth of rare blood disorder therapy, triggered the sting. When the payments failed to land, Mendoza's deputy phoned an insurer demanding an explanation, revealing their nervous dependence on speed. Delgado secured warrants for simultaneous dawn raids. On a breezy November morning, agents converged on all 5 pharmacies. Inside Buena Vida they found the cashier halfway through her first cafecito, startled by blue-jacketed officials sweeping past the empty display cases. The stockroom held only saline 4 bags and plastic containers filled with sand to mimic the weight of drug vials, props for potential auditors. Computers seized on site showed spreadsheets cataloging thousands of imaginary patients, each assigned a diagnosis code and a shipping tracking number that led to nowhere. Mendoza herself was located at a Brickell condominium overlooking Biscayne Bay, interviewing a real estate broker about an offshore-flagged yacht. She opened the door in designer athleisure, momentarily mistaking the agents for delivery staff. Her arrest was quiet. She asked permission to put on lipstick before the booking photo. The case unfolded in federal court downtown. Prosecutors laid out the fraud's elegance. Bogus prescriptions funneled through real billing software, refunds delayed by constant churn, laundered proceeds converted into luxury condos and cryptocurrency wallets named after constellations, Orion RX, Lyra Holdings, echoes of the shells she created. Witnesses included the retired uncle, bewildered to learn he allegedly supervised 5 pharmacies while gardening in San Juan. Noah Kim testified via video, explaining heat maps and anomaly clustering in language a jury could grasp. His calm description of data spikes felt like watching a tide chart foretell a storm. Mendoza's defense argued systemic insurer negligence, painting her as an opportunist in a broken healthcare economy. The jury disagreed. After 6 days they returned guilty on conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Sentence: 13 years plus forfeiture of $72 million in seized assets, luxury vehicles, the yet unbought yacht deposit, and a warehouse of boxed virtual reality headsets she planned to market next. The shuttered pharmacies now sit dark, their neon signs unplugged, dust gathering where pill bottles never stood. Coral Way commuters barely glance at Buena Vida. To them it is another failed storefront. Yet some evenings, after the traffic thins and the streetlights hum, the flicker of that dormant open sign still catches the eye. A ghostly pulse from a time when medicine flowed on paper, money flowed like water, and shelves full of nothing sold for a fortune. The sunbirds of Puglia. Under the unblinking sky of southern Italy, the wheat fields near Brindisi shimmered with heat and promise. In 2020, a company called Solala Renewables announced plans to transform 600 hectares of that parched landscape into Europe's largest solar farm. The project's name, Ala del Sol or Sun Wing, evoked birds taking flight, panels tilting like feathers toward the Adriatic light. Investors loved the imagery. Pension funds from Milan to Manchester bought into a €210 million green bond that promised environmental impact with utility-grade stability. The man behind the vision, Leonardo Carli, seemed carved from sun-polished marble. 45, tanned, cufflinks shaped like tiny photovoltaic wafers. He spoke of climate urgency with theatrical intensity. Carly told journalists he had once been a monk in Umbria before studying electrical engineering in Stuttgart, a backstory that lent both spirituality and German precision to his persona. He hosted due diligence tours in a rented helicopter, circling low over fields marked with bright orange stakes where rows of panels would soon rise. Visitors inhaled hot sage and diesel, picturing acres of glittering glass. Paperwork looked airtight. Solala held provisional grid connection permits, purchase orders from a Spanish panel manufacturer, and a 3-page comfort letter from the regional government hinting at fast-track approvals. What few noticed was that the purchase orders were stamped pro forma, contingent on financing that did not yet exist. Meanwhile, the comfort letter carried no legal weight at all. Carly nevertheless pressed forward, issuing green bonds through a Luxembourg SPV that funneled funds into an Italian escrow account controlled solely by him and his chief operating officer, Marta Santini. Construction began with fanfare. Bulldozers leveled soil and bright yellow fencing sprouted along the provincial road. But by late autumn, activity stalled. Carly blamed supply chain snags in Shanghai, then a shortage of transformer oil, then the pandemic. Investors still received quarterly reports filled with drone photos, always the same angles, always at sunset, depicting neat rows of racking systems. The text cited 55% completion, yet drivers on the provincial road saw only skeletal frames and scattered pallets of unopened crates. The first real crack appeared in a regional newspaper, La Voce del Salento. Reporter Giulia Neri, chasing a feel-good green energy story, visited the site and counted just 17 installed panels, far short of the 340,000 touted in brochures. When she requested a comment, Carly's PR agency sent an airy statement about phased deployment strategies. Unsatisfied, she checked import records. Not one shipping manifest showed panels delivered to Brindisi's port under Solala's name. Neri's article, headlined "The Solar Farm Without Solar Panels," gained modest online traction, just enough to reach the desk of Luca Barbero, a junior analyst at Italy's securities watchdog, Consa. Barbero reviewed Solala's bond prospectus. One line jumped out. The trustee bank overseeing investor funds was a small cooperative in San Marino, outside the European Central Bank's direct supervision. Another red flag. The engineering firm listed as EPC contractor, Heliotech Adriatica, had no website and shared a tax code with a shuttered marble import business in Bari. Barbero forwarded his concerns to Consub's enforcement unit, which quietly opened an inquiry. Investigators subpoenaed Solala's invoices and discovered a carousel of payments. Bond proceeds moved from the Luxembourg SPV to the San Marino Bank, then to Heliotech Adriatica for progress milestones. Within days, 80% of those amounts looped back into Carly's personal account in Malta under the label Consulting Success Fee. The remaining 20% funded modest site work, enough earth-moving to keep drones busy but not enough to produce a single watt. Consub coordinated with Italy's Guardia di Finanza. At dawn on a windy March morning, officers rolled onto the half-finished site, dust swirling around their boots. They sealed shipping crates. Many were empty, weighted with scrap metal. In Solala's Brindisi office, a converted farmhouse with motivational quotes stenciled in English, agents seized laptops revealing a folder named Ali Undersökningsra, Wings of Wax. Inside, Photoshop mock-ups of completed arrays, time-stamped weeks before any construction began. Carly was arrested at Rome Ciampino Airport while boarding a private jet leased under an LLC called Sunbird Aviation. In his briefcase, a Swiss bank fob, a monograph on St. Francis, and a check for €4 million made out to a yacht broker in Monaco. Santini surrendered 2 days later, claiming she believed the project genuine until administrative delays multiplied. Courtroom proceedings in Lecce drew crowds of environmentally minded students and retirees whose savings funded the bonds. Prosecutors walked jurors through money flows projected in warm Mediterranean hues, orange arrows leaving investors, red arrows circling tax havens, pale yellow arrows trickling back to the dusty field. Expert witnesses testified that only 2 megawatts worth of panels had ever been purchased, a rounding error on the promised 200 megawatts. Carly's defense cast him as a visionary undone by COVID-19 and bureaucratic inertia. But Santini, seeking leniency, detailed how Carly staged helicopter tours. The orange stakes were repositioned daily to create an illusion of progress. After 8 days, the jury returned guilty on fraud, market manipulation, and money laundering. Carly received 15 years, Santini 5. The court ordered confiscation of €137 million, luxury apartments in Milan's Porta Nuova district, Maltese bank deposits, and the down payment on the Monaco yacht. Recovery teams expect bondholders will see perhaps 30 cents on the euro. The Brindisi site now lies silent. Racks tilt toward the sun with nothing to catch its rays, like skeletal wings frozen mid-beat. Wild fennel threads between steel footings, and locals joke that the only energy harvested there is gossip. Yet the episode leaves a cautionary glow. In the age of green finance, sunlight can be as easy to counterfeit as numbers on a screen. The skyline ledger of Chicago. The Chicago River glinted slate green under February haze when Midwest Horizon REIT rang the closing bell on the CBOE. The trust, marketed as the first blockchain-enabled commercial real estate fund, promised to democratize skyscrapers by tokenizing floor space in Class A office towers. Slick videos showed animated blueprints morphing into QR codes. Anyone with $1,000 could, in theory, own 0.0004% of a glass spire on Wacker Drive and receive quarterly micro-dividends drawn from tenant rent. At the center stood Avery Knox, 39, former investment bank analyst turned prop tech evangelist. Knox dressed venture casual, tailored jeans, merino hoodie, yet spoke in the measured cadences of a bond trader. He claimed Horizon had quietly acquired partial titles to 6 loop properties through sale-leaseback deals, each registered on a private blockchain called Skyledger. No more opaque partnerships, he assured webinars. Every deed reference and rental payment would live forever, immutable. Investors loved the frictionless story. Midwest pension plans, crypto influencers on Twitter Spaces, even a Des Moines church endowment wired funds. Horizon's S1 listed $480 million in tokenized real estate assets, and its debut raised another $120 million. Tokens, tradable on Horizon's own exchange, rose 40% in the first week, flashing green on smartphone apps that overlaid building photos with celebratory confetti. But one Friday night, Grace Ellison, a due diligence associate at a regional insurance company, caught a mismatch while reviewing Horizon for a possible $30 million placement. The REIT's prospectus named 333 West Monroe as its flagship holding. Ellison, curious, pulled the Cook County Recorder's latest deed. Title remained unchanged. The building was still wholly owned by an institutional landlord, Camford Properties. No supplemental memorandum recorded any fractional sale. She emailed Horizon's investor relations desk. The reply attributed the gap to pending courthouse digitization backlog. Unconvinced, Allison shared her findings with Tom Reyes, a reporter at the Chicago Tribune notorious for unraveling municipal bond snares. Reyes contacted Camford, whose CFO laughed outright. "We've never sold a square inch," he said. A short column appeared online, "Blockchain REIT's crown jewel not actually owned." Knox dismissed it as FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, insisting final paperwork would post next quarter. Enter Special Agent Dana Wu of the SEC's Chicago Regional Office, freshly rotated from cyber enforcement. Wu subpoenaed Horizon's transactional nodes, 5 cloud servers supposedly hosting Skyledger. Instead of a distributed network, she found a single Amazon instance looping timestamped JSON files. The immutable chain could be rewritten by anyone with admin credentials stored in a plaintext file called keys.txt. Inside, the property registry contained 29 entries. Cross-checking deeds, Wu confirmed only one was genuine, a strip mall in Peoria bought for $2.4 million. While subpoenas flew, Horizon kept announcing new deals. Tokenization of River North Tower complete, first dividend airdrop next month. The dividends were funded by fresh token sales, money in, money out, yet dashboards displayed them as net rental income. In Slack channels, community managers urged holders to HODL Skyline, mocking skeptics with gifs of soaring elevators. Wu's team quietly interviewed a former Horizon programmer, Lucas Patel, who had left after 3 months. Patel revealed that Skyledger's block hashes were generated by RAND. He had raised concerns, but Knox told him investors buy vision, not math. Patel also described Knox's obsession with public symbolism. He wanted to buy a century-old bank building, rename it Horizon House, and project token prices on its facade. "Chicago loves big lit numbers," Knox had said. "Will be the new Sears clock." In late April, token liquidity thinned. Two whales attempted to cash out. Prices dipped 15%. Knox issued an AMA live stream from a penthouse lounge, skyline twinkling behind him, assuring viewers rental inflows would cover redemptions. Minutes after the feed ended, he wired $9 million from Horizon's omnibus account to a Cayman entity named Lake Effect Ventures, a shell he controlled. Wu now holding a sealed indictment, coordinated with U.S. Marshals. Before dawn on May 3rd, agents arrived at Horizon's Fulton Market headquarters, where neon signs spelled "Own the Sky." Knox was prepping slides for a London roadshow. He seemed startled, not fearful, greeting officers with, "We're in fundraising mode, can this wait?" 2 laptops and a hardware wallet key ring sat on his desk. One key was labeled Plan B. Seized servers revealed the full carousel. $600 million raised, $510 million routed through Skyledger wallets, 70% siphoned to offshore trusts then recycled as tenant rent to fake deposit accounts. To maintain the illusion, Knox paid actual property tax bills for those addresses, forging QR receipts to show county confirmation. A spreadsheet titled Dividend Model Wizard.xlsm updated payouts automatically, pulling from whatever new cash balance appeared each week. The trial unfolded in the Dirksen Federal Building, its windows overlooking the very skyline tokens were supposed to fractionalize. Prosecutors displayed side-by-side images, the authentic Cook County deed book on microfilm, and Skyledger's editable JSON. Jurors listened to Patel explain how a simple for-loop fabricated blocks. The most damning evidence, however, was a PowerPoint recovered from Knox's Dropbox, slide 2 titled, Narrative Arbitrage, Selling the Future of Ownership. Knox's defense argued the model was pre-revenue, pending final closings delayed by pandemic bureaucracy. But the jury needed only 9 hours. Verdict: guilty on securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Sentence: 16 years with restitution pegged at $410 million. Funds now frozen across 14 jurisdictions. Midwest Horizon's tokens plummeted to fractions of a cent, trading on message boards for novelty value. The office towers Knox claimed are still there, sun flashing off glass, owned by the same landlords as before. A small plaque on 333 West Monroe's lobby now notes, "No affiliation with Midwest Horizon." Tourists snap photos, bemused that a blockchain scandal warrants commemorative medal. Grace Ellison remains at her insurance firm, promoted to director. When interns ask how she spotted the fraud, she smiles. "Skyscrapers are hard to hide. Start by looking up." And on certain evenings, as the river darkens and office lights wink out, the skyline seems unchanged, solid, enduring, while somewhere beneath, a ledger of empty promises flickers in a forgotten server, its blocks immutable only until someone bothers to read them. The liquid gold of J. Long before dawn, the olive groves of Andalusia shimmered under silver moonlight, waiting for the harvest that would turn their fruit into what locals called oro liquido, liquid gold. In 2019, a boutique exporter named Olivo Real Selección burst onto the scene, promising an ultra-premium extra virgin oil so pure it shared a chemical fingerprint with rainwater. Chef influencers drizzled it over burrata, sommeliers swirled it in stemless glasses, and food magazines declared it Spain's answer to Grand Cru Burgundy. Bottles, numbered and wax-sealed, sold for €59 apiece in Madrid delicatessens and hip New York markets. The mastermind was Alvaro Penalver, 36, tall, impeccably groomed, the grandson, he said, of legendary millers from Jaén Province. Alvaro drove a slate green Land Rover with tan leather seats that smelled of rosemary, carrying journalists on curated tours. He would stop at a hillside, pluck a perfect picul olive, slice it with a small knife, and let visitors taste its green bitterness while quoting Lorca. Behind him loomed a modern steel mill emblazoned with Olivo Real stylized crown logo. Press releases claimed the facility used ultrasound extraction to lock in polyphenol, a technology validated by the EU Horizon 2020 initiative. Early success brought bigger ambition. Alvaro launched a Reserva de la Familia line, available only by subscription, and opened an investment vehicle, Jane Heritage Notes, offering 6% annual coupon payments secured by inventories of high-grade oil. Small family offices for Munich, a London celebrity chef, and even a Wisconsin University endowment bought in, trusting Spain's venerable olive oil reputation. Within 16 months the notes raised €68 million, earmarked, the prospectus said, for orchard expansion and a new bottling plant near Ubeda. Yet, beneath the green-gold sheen, tiny bubbles of doubt began to surface. First came a routine lab test from an Italian importer. The oil, though delicious, failed the panel's sensory threshold for extra virgin. Free acidity too high, ultraviolet absorption inconsistent. When the importer emailed Alvaro, he blamed it temperature excursion during shipping and overnight replacement cartons, samples that passed. The incident faded, eclipsed by Olivo Real winning a gold medal at a boutique food show in Copenhagen, a competition where, investigators later learned, Alvaro had also sponsored the VIP lounge. The second tremor arrived inside the Andalusia Regional Agriculture Ministry. Analyst Rosa Jimenez compared declared harvest volumes to subsidy claims. Olivo Real reported crushing 28,000 tons of olives, triple the output of neighboring estates of similar acreage. Satellite images showed groves green enough, but harvest capacity photographs, updated in real time, revealed only 2 modest collection bays, far short of handling that tonnage. Jimenez flagged the anomaly to the Guardia Civil's food fraud unit, known as Soprona. Captain Martin Lopez, seasoned in wine and cheese scams, drove unannounced to Olivo Real's mill one misty March morning. Workers in clean overalls guided him past gleaming centrifuges. Tanks were sealed, each tagged with QR codes linking to blockchain batch histories. When Lopez asked to see live bottling, Alvaro smiled apologetically. Maintenance shut down, he said, offering espresso in a polished office scented with citrus candles. Lopez left with no sample, but his instinct hummed like cicadas. Everything looked a touch too curated. Soprona obtained a discreet warrant to place GPS trackers on Olivo Real's tanker trucks. Over 3 weeks, the trackers traced nightly routes not to Jane Groves but to an industrial estate near Valencia, home to Aceit Segura, a low-cost refinery specializing in deodorized lamp anti-oil unfit for human consumption until chemically stripped. Tankers returned before dawn, blending the neutralized oil with modest amounts of genuine early harvest juice, then rushing the mixture into dark glass bottles whose labels boasted cold-pressed at 25 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, coupon payments on Jane Heritage Notes arrived like clockwork, masking any suspicion among investors. Those payouts, forensic accountants would later show, came from new note subscriptions, not olive sales. A familiar Ponzi vine wound silently around stainless steel legs. The sting unfolded during Holy Week, when tourists thronged Andalusian plazas for processions. Soprona officers, accompanied by food safety chemists, swept into the mill at 4 a.m. Tanks were sampled. Acidity measured 0.9%, legal cutoff for extra virgin is 0.8. More telling, chromatographic analysis detected ethyl ester markers associated with crude blends. Computer hard drives revealed spreadsheets titled blend_optima.xlsx, showing recipes. 70% deodorized oil, 25% refined, 5% premium to boost aromas. Another folder named Bono_Cartera listed investor inflows against coupon schedules. Alvaro was arrested at Sevilla's Santa Justa station, en route to catch the high-speed train to Madrid for a televised cooking segment. In his leather satchel lay signed term sheets from a Scandinavian grocery chain and a handwritten list of prospective investors labeled Plan America. The trial convened in Granada. Prosecutors projected infrared images of tanker routes and presented side-by-side tastings. Real extra virgin glowing emerald, Olivo Real Reserva slightly flatter, its fruitiness engineered by flavored chlorophyll additives. Investors recounted trusting sustainability pitches. One London chef wept describing menu descriptions now rendered fraudulent. Alvaro's defense invoked industry standardization pressures, and claimed he intended to replace blended batches once pandemic supply issues abated, an argument that wilted under Jimenez's harvest data and Soprona's GPS trails. After 7 days, the court pronounced Alvaro guilty of aggravated food fraud, false accounting, and securities deception. Sentence: 11 years, €54 million restitution, and a lifetime ban from managing agri-food companies. Seizure orders reached villas in Marbella and a small sailboat named Orofino moored in Alicante. Back in Jaén, spring rains washed dust from silent centrifuges. The mill's crown logo has been pried off, leaving 2 drill holes that weep rust-down white stucco. Local farmers, unscathed but embarrassed, continue their honest harvests, selling to cooperatives at fair prices. Tour buses still crest the ridge, passengers snapping photos of endless olive grid lines. Guides now add a cautionary footnote: purity, like gold, must be tested, not merely tasted. And somewhere in a pantry far from Andalusia, a wax-sealed bottle of Olivo Real Reserva sits unopened, label promising poetry and sunlight. Twist the cap though, and the oil inside tells another story, one of twilight blends, midnight tankers, and a golden sheen that fades in honest light. The silent casks of Speyside. Fog clung to the River Spey the morning Dalbury Spirits announced its flagship fund, Heritage Cask Reserve, promising investors a taste of Scotland's liquid history. From a Georgian townhouse in Edinburgh's new town, brochures whispered of sherry-soaked barrels slumbering in stone dunnage warehouses, gaining value with every silent year. Whiskey auctions were booming, rare single malts fetched art-world prices. Dalbury's founder, Patrick Lennox, vowed to democratize the dram, selling fractional ownership of 8,000 aging casks while guaranteeing a steady 9% return backed by insured, auditable inventory. Lennox, 44, wore tweed the way bankers wear pinstripes, as a uniform of quiet authority. He claimed lineage to coastal distillers, peppered conversation with Gaelic phrases, and charmed pension trustees and Silicon Roundabout tech founders alike. Prospective clients toured a Victorian warehouse outside Elgin where Lennox lifted a copper dog, drew a sample the color of dark brass, and let visitors inhale raisin and smoke. Papers were signed before the nose cleared. Money flooded in, £120 million in 15 months, parked in an Isle of Man trust that wired quarterly coupons like clockwork. Investors received glossy statements featuring cask IDs, fill dates, and predicted maturation curves. A line graph always glided upward, amber on black, as inevitable as time itself. The veneer cracked in spring 2022 when freelance whiskey writer Isla Cameron attempted a profile of Dalbury's impressive inventory. She requested warehouse access to photograph cask numbers. Lennox politely deferred, citing royal warrant confidentiality. Suspicious, Cameron filed a Freedom of Information request with Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, asking for warehouse storage declarations. The reply listed only 612 casks under Dalbury's excise account, far short of the 8,000 touted. Cameron compared Dalbury's published cask IDs to the UK cask register. Several belonged to well-known independent bottlers, 2 were listed as already emptied, and 1 had been auctioned in Hong Kong 6 months earlier. She published an article titled Phantom Barrels. Whiskey forums buzzed, but finance circles shrugged. Coupons still arrived on time. Not for long. A compliance officer at St. Andrew Asset Management noticed Dalbury's prospectus claimed full insurance via Highland Assurance plc, a name reminiscent of a major insurer yet, on closer reading, entirely separate. Company house filings showed Highland Assurance capitalized at a mere £2,000. The officer forwarded the fine to the Financial Conduct Authority, and investigator Rory Quinn opened a quiet file. Quinn drove north on a rain-flecked dawn, arriving at the Elgin warehouse just as a forklift trundled barrels toward an unmarked lorry. He noted the racks seemed thin, each bay held a single row instead of the customary 3. Quinn requested the movement book from the warehouseman, who confessed Dalbury leased only the front quadrant, rows visible on tours, while the remainder stored garden furniture for a local retailer. The lorry's destination, moreover, was not a bottling hall but a bonded facility being vacated by a craft gin startup. Armed with these discrepancies, the FCA secured a court order to trace Dalbury's funds. Bank statements revealed a looping current. New subscriptions entered the trust, a slice covered interest payments, and the bulk moved to shell companies in Luxembourg labeled Barrel Procurement. From there, money purchased waterfront property in Alicante, vintage Bentleys, and a half-share in a seaplane Lennox kept at Loch Lomond. Investigators coordinated with Police Scotland for a synchronized strike. At 6 a.m. one September morning, officers descended on the Edinburgh townhouse and the Elgin warehouse. Inside Lennox's office lay a mahogany desk stacked with tasting notebooks, each page curiously uniform. Identical pen strokes, same spelling quirks, time-stamped but never flecked with whiskey. A server in the corner hosted Cask Track, Dalbury's proprietary blockchain ledger. Forensic Techs discovered it was a simple SQLite database with manual entry fields and a Simulate Angel Share button adjusting volumes downward 2% annually. Press once, the illusion matured another year. Warehouse inspection told the rest. Of the 612 legitimate casks, fewer than half held spirit older than 3 years, and many leaks had gone unpatched, blackening staves and mournful streaks. The most valuable item turned out to be a retired Port Ellen barrel repurposed as a marketing prop, bone dry inside. Lennox was arrested at Glasgow Airport en route to Reykjavik, ticket paid by a Dalbury subsidiary titled Cask Voyager Limited. During interrogation he maintained that inflation in cask prices justified pro forma scaling, and that real inventory would catch up once a delayed Islay contract closed. Investigators later found the contract, unsigned, coffee-stained, tucked inside a book of Robert Burns' poetry. Trial convened in the Grand Court of Edinburgh, paneled with aged oak. Lennox once invoked as a metaphor for whiskey's patience. Prosecutors led jurors through a sensory journey, authentic sherry but aromas versus photographs of empty racks, spreadsheets mapping funds through offshore tributaries, email threads where Lennox coached staff to keep tours front-loaded, never let them count rows. A distillery warehouseman testified, voice tinged with quiet betrayal, that he had been paid cash to line up duplicate cask ends for photo shoots, hammering stenciled numbers onto bare lids. Lennox's defense painted him as a visionary squeezed by pandemic shipping chaos, claiming coupons were advances against imminent re-racking. But Isla Cameron, the journalist, delivered the simplest blow, reading Dalbury's own tasting notes aloud, 3 separate casks, 3 identical descriptions down to the phrase, distant sea spray. The courtroom fell silent. Even oak paneling seemed to creak in embarrassment. The jury returned guilty on fraud, false accounting, and money laundering. Sentence: 14 years, forfeiture of assets, and in order to reimburse investors from any future royalties Lennox might earn writing about whiskey, a poetic penalty the judge likened to making the thief rebuild the barrel he broke. Today the Elgin warehouse stands half empty, genuine casks consolidated and awaiting auction to repay victims. Tour buses still pass, guides reminding passengers that Scotland ages its spirits slowly, but truth, when neglected, evaporates faster than any angel's share. And somewhere in a dim pub off the Royal Mile, tourists lift drams of real Speyside malt, unaware that a paper empire once balanced on aromas alone, dispersing the moment someone cared to measure the liquid in the wood. The Austin drop. Austin's tech corridor shimmered under July heat, glass offices radiating optimism and air-conditioned bravado. On the top floor of one such cube, Helix One Diagnostics promised a revolution, a single fingerstick of blood yielding 200 biomarkers in under 5 minutes. Gideon Hale, the company's 35-year-old founder, delivered the vision with preacher's certainty, soft Texan drawl, blonde hair pushed back like a surfer who discovered genomics by accident. Investors adored the origin story. Gideon's kid sister had battled lupus. Traditional tests were slow and costly. He vowed to democratize precision medicine, a phrase that fluttered across venture capital blogs like a monarch butterfly. Within 3 funding rounds, Helix One was valued at $2.8 billion, its lobby filled with sun-bleached cedar and a moss wall spelling less blood, more life. Yet behind the glass a quieter narrative unfolded. Maya Chin, a junior data engineer hired from the University of Texas, maintained the pipeline that converted lab machine output into sleek dashboards for clinicians. Late one Thursday she spotted an anomaly. Sample ID A17-0433 appeared twice in the raw feed, once from a clinic in Dallas, once from a trial site in Phoenix, each showing identical timestamps down to the millisecond. Maya reviewed prior logs and found other duplicates, always tied to demo days when Helix One showcased live runs for journalists. She flagged the issue to her supervisor, Lars, who shrugged. "Glitch in the consolidation script," he said, "the science guys will patch it." The next morning Maya received an email, copied to Gideon, thanking her for diligence and instructing her to route future log concerns to a new quality channel. That channel motioned like a dead letterbox. Messages went in, no replies came out. Meanwhile, Gideon rehearsed for the biggest pitch of his life. The state of Texas intended to award $300 million in Medicaid contracts for point-of-care diagnostics, and Helix One stood front row. He paced a private conference room overlooking Lady Bird Lake, holding a white ceramic mug emblazoned "Believe in Better Blood." His head of regulatory affairs, Colleen Vargas, slid a folder across the table. Preliminary performance data, sensitivity and specificity charting near perfect. Gideon asked whether the FDA verification trials, still in progress, might delay state approval. Colleen hesitated, a blink too long. Gideon's smile faltered. "Greg's lab will get us the interim numbers," she said. "We'll be fine." Greg was Dr. Greg Halvorsen, a flamboyant biochemist with a gray ponytail and a fondness for micropipettes custom-painted in psychedelic swirls. His lab occupied one wing of Helix One's office, access controlled by fingerprint scanners even janitors couldn't override. Employees joked that Greg guarded secrets more zealously than Fort Knox. In truth, his machines rarely ran at full tilt, parts back-ordered, reagents unstable in Texas heat. To maintain appearances, lab technicians diluted samples and supplemented missing biomarkers with algorithmic confidence markers, derived from patient health questionnaires. On dashboards, the synthetic estimates blended seamlessly with genuine readings. Local freelance journalist Danny Perez smelled something off. An anonymous tip, later traced to a disgruntled ex-phlebotomist, claimed Helix One's device failed to detect elevated potassium in a teenager who later collapsed from cardiac arrest. Danny requested an interview. The company's press office offered a glossy PDF instead. Not satisfied, Danny filed public records requests for hospital incident reports mentioning Helix One equipment. Several came back with redactions, but the pattern grew visible. Inconclusive results, then traditional lab confirmation, then delayed treatment. Danny met Maya one evening at a food truck park on South Congress. Over paper bowls of pad thai, Maya recounted the duplicate sample IDs and the silence that followed. She slid across a thumb drive containing anonymized logs. "If the pipeline's broken," she whispered, "patients are too." Danny nodded, eyes reflecting neon string lights overhead. Back at her apartment, Danny cross-referenced the duplicates with demonstration dates. Every time Helix One hosted investors or regulators, performance spiked. On ordinary days, error rates crept upward. She drafted a 3,000-word exposé titled "The Blood That Behaves on Cue" and sent fact-check queries to Helix One. The company replied with a cease and desist threat and hinted at defamation suits. Danny's editor hesitated, legal team pacing. While lawyers wrangled, events outpaced them. The FDA, conducting a routine pre-approval audit, arrived unannounced at Helix One's lab. Inspectors requested instrument calibration logs. Greg produced glossy binders. An agent compared serial numbers and found half didn't match the machines on the bench. A second inspector sampled reagent vials. Several were past expiration, labels peeled away and rewritten in fresh ink. The audit escalated to a formal inspection that would bar the company from shipping devices pending clarification. Word leaked within hours. Investors began calling in convertible note clauses. Gideon attempted reassurance via live stream, but his voice wavered. A week later, the state of Texas froze its contract deliberations. In desperation, Gideon convened an all-hands meeting in the eerie atrium. Employees gathered among potted fiddle leaf figs. He spoke of haters, of regulatory overreach, of a temporary pause. Mid-speech, federal marshals entered with a warrant to seize hard drives and lab notebooks. Whispers ricocheted through the atrium like falling glass. Gideon's shoulders sank, the performative glow dimming at last. A grand jury heard chilling testimony. Internal memos instructing engineers to simulate missing rows, patient consent forms backdated so negative outcomes appeared unrelated, investor slide decks inflated with data from no-scope pilot trials in which the device wasn't even plugged in. Maya testified, voice steadied by resolve. Greg, facing wire fraud counts, accepted a plea deal and revealed that fewer than 10% of reported biomarkers came from actual assays. The rest emerged from statistical models. Gideon's defense portrayed him as visionary undone by technical delays, but emails revealed he ordered suppression of adverse event reports days before courting new capital. The jury returned guilty verdicts for fraud and conspiracy. Gideon received 13 years in federal prison, plus restitution to investors and a victims fund for harmed patients. Several months after the trial, Maya visited Lady Bird Lake at dusk. Paddleboarders drifted beneath pink clouds. The skyline glimmered, ambition undimmed despite scandal. She sat on a bench, phone buzzing with recruitment pitches from cautious but intrigued biotech firms. Across town, Danny's article, finally published, earned awards, though she cited anonymous engineers like Maya as the true heroes. Helix One's headquarters now stood vacant, moss wall wilting, the slogan less blood, more life fading beneath a shut-off skylight. Yet science in Austin continued, slow, peer-reviewed, deliberate. Maya found comfort in that pace. Data that didn't jump on cue, machines that either worked or didn't, truth that might pause but would not, in the end, disappear. The quiet collapse of Fairfield and Sons. The streets of Midtown Manhattan hummed with their usual low-grade restlessness when the first tremor reached the old brown brick offices of Fairfield and Sons Asset Management. Secretaries heard it in the tone of an early morning phone call. A client, polite yet urgent, asking why a routine redemption request had not been met. There was no panic. Fairfield had handled far larger withdrawals. Still, the note caught the attention of Eleanor Pierce, a senior portfolio officer whose instinct for trouble had guided her through 2 recessions. She made a discreet call to the back office and asked for a status update. The clerk's answer was a stumble. Funds, he said, were in transit. The phrase floated in the air like an unfinished sentence. Eleanor felt a chill. Money, in her experience, was never in transit. It either sat in a client's sweep account or it didn't. She thanked the clerk, set down the receiver, and opened the firm's internal ledger. The numbers glowed steady, almost smug. Billions under management, returns that glided upward with metronomic grace. Yet on line after line, the same custodian name appeared, Madoff Securities LLC. 4 years Fairfield and Sons had enjoyed a reputation lifted by that single association. Bernard Madoff's fund delivered profits so smooth they resembled something silk-spun. Clients loved the consistency, partners loved the fees. Even Eleanor, ever cautious, had accepted the legend because regulators had taken their swings and found nothing. But now a single unfulfilled redemption suggested the legend might be weakening. She jotted a note, closed her laptop, and climbed the marble stairs to reach Thomas Fairfield's office. Thomas, silver-haired, dapper and battle-tested, was sipping Darjeeling while appraising the skyline. When Eleanor spoke, his teacup stilled midway. He listened, nodding gently, then suggested they call Madoff directly. Eleanor dialed and placed the call on speaker. Madoff's assistant answered, cheerful, promising a callback. Hours passed. No callback came. Twilight settled over Midtown. Lights blinked on floor by floor in nearby towers, but Fairfield's top floor remained dim except for the glow of monitors repeating the same perfect numbers. By next morning another client had phoned, then another. Redemptions piled into the inbox like unsent invitations. Eleanor's unease evolved into certainty. Something was rotten inside, returns too perfect to be real. She decided on a quiet visit to the custodian's trading floor. Officially it would be a courtesy call. Unofficially it was reconnaissance. She took the early train to Long Island, fog sliding past the windows, carrying with her a hollow anticipation. The building that housed Madoff Securities was oddly austere, as though designed not to be noticed. A single guard waved her through after a cursory glance at her business card. No one asked her to sign a log. The reception area felt almost like a dentist's waiting room. Comfortable chairs, old magazines, soft jazz overhead. A receptionist offered coffee and a smile but could not locate Mr. Madoff or anyone from operations. Everyone, she said, was in meetings. Eleanor thanked her, collected a branded pen from the counter, and stepped back outside. A custodian of billions, she thought, should project something grander than a suburban dentist's lobby. Back in Manhattan, she opened drawers long left closed. Trade confirms, photocopies, not originals. Clearing statements, partial or oddly formatted. A pattern of omissions revealed itself like invisible ink under heat. She compiled the gaps and walked them to Thomas Fairfield. He accepted the bundle, lips pressed thin. He had heard rumors, yes, but rumors traveled Wall Street as freely as subways. Evidence was another matter, and so far even the SEC had come up empty-handed. Yet Eleanor's thin sheaf of missing documents felt heavier than proof. It was the weight of everything that wasn't there. The partners met that night in the oak-paneled conference room. They spoke in measured tones about fiduciary duty, reputational risk, and the possibility, still only a possibility, that Fairfield and Sons had funneled client money into a mirage. One partner suggested waiting. Another proposed a partial withdrawal to test liquidity. Eleanor, voice level, urged immediate redemption of all funds and a formal disclosure to investors. Silence followed, broken only by the soft hum of the air system. Finally Thomas nodded. Redemption requests would go out at dawn. Dawn came, and with it chaos. Fairfield's email server pinged back automated replies. Madoff Securities had halted all activity pending an internal review. Phone lines produced busy signals. On television, a news ticker scrolled past, terse and devastating. Investment icon Bernard Madoff arrested in alleged $50 billion fraud. Inside Fairfield and Sons no one spoke above a whisper, as though loud voices might shatter what stability remained. Clients called in waves, some furious, some frightened, some too stunned to find words. Eleanor drafted a statement acknowledging exposure, pledging cooperation with authorities, and outlining a recovery plan. Thomas signed it with a hand that trembled only slightly. Weeks passed. Federal agents collected boxes of Fairfield records, polite yet implacable. Investors filed suits. Newspapers resurrected photos of cocktail receptions where smiling Fairfield partners posed beside Madoff, toasting returns that now gleamed like fool's gold. But amid the wreckage small mercies surfaced. Fairfield's own balance sheet, though bruised, remained solvent. They had not borrowed against non-existent profits. The firm's advisory arm, once overshadowed by its feeder fund revenues, retained loyal clients who valued transparency over spectacle. Thomas announced a restructuring, a narrower focus on audited, low-leverage strategies, steered by Eleanor's vigilance. On a cold January evening, months after the first tremor, Eleanor stood by the office window watching snow settle on the city. Taxi headlights etched liquid paths across Fifth Avenue. She recalled the ledger's perfect numbers, as serene as winter's first snowfall, masking depths no one had probed. Deception, she reflected, often wore a calm face. It relied on people's deep craving for certainty. Fairfield and Sons had craved it too. They had accepted a pattern too smooth to question because smoothness felt safe. Now the firm's survival depended on embracing the opposite, accepting volatility, doubt, the rough edges of genuine markets. Eleanor returned to her desk and opened a fresh ledger, this one plain, unassuming, its first entry small but scrupulously real. The suspense now lay not in concealed ruin but in hard, transparent rebuilding. She exhaled, feeling the tension ease though not vanish. Trust, once cracked, rebuilt itself slowly, grain by grain. Yet the process, she decided, held its own quiet dignity. A final phone rang, a client calling not to withdraw but to inquire about the new approach. Eleanor answered, voice steady, letting the conversation drift toward the future. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing footprints, covering the night in honest white. Shadows over Munich, the Wirecard mirage. A mild spring wind circled Munich's Maximilianstrasse as analysts filed into the glass foyer of Wirecard AG for an innovation showcase. Inside, blue LED lights traced the outlines of circuit boards while baristas served cappuccinos etched with the company logo. Investors thrived on such touches. They confirmed the narrative that Wirecard stood at the cutting edge of Europe's digital payments boom. At a spotless demo kiosk, Chief Operating Officer Jan Marsalek glided through a slide deck that promised friction-free payments from Singapore to Sao Paulo. His voice was soft, precise, and reassuring. Profits, he explained, were growing faster than the market could model. When questions arose about cash held in shadowy Asian subsidiaries, he smiled almost sympathetically. Conservative German accounting, he said, is sometimes slow to capture global speed. Not far away at the offices of the Financial Times in London, a lanky investigative reporter named Dan McCrum sifted through a trove of leaked spreadsheets. Something about Wirecard's Asian growth felt synthetic. Transaction volumes in Manila looked suspiciously round. Merchant names repeated like copied cells. McCrum phoned a source, a jittery former Wirecard accountant who described data laundries, phantom customer lists uploaded to pad revenue before each quarterly report. The whistleblower claimed to have seen entire folders marked consolidation magic. Facts were sparse, yet the pattern was familiar to McCrum. Swelling margins without proportional operating complexity, a melody too perfect to be live. Across the Izar River, a junior auditor at Ernst & Young named Francisca Baum worked late, scrolling through PDFs of bank confirmations. 2 Philippine banks supposedly safeguarded 1.9 billion euros of Wirecard's cash. Yet the faxes verifying those balances carried electronic signatures pixelated at the edges, like a counterfeit watermark printed one resolution too low. Francisca raised the issue with her manager, who reminded her that client growth companies sometimes used smaller regional banks. "We can't chase every smudge," he added. Francisca nodded, but she saved the questionable faxes in a folder titled, Maybe. June arrived, and with it a Financial Times expose outlining forged sales, rent-a-merchant schemes, and an opaque network of third-party partners. Wirecard CEO Marcus Braun donned a black turtleneck for an emergency webcast, calling the allegations fake news driven by short sellers. The market believed him. The share price dipped then rallied harder, as though skepticism itself had been vanquished. German regulators, anxious about foreign speculators attacking a national tech champion, opened a probe into the journalists, not Wirecard. For Braun, it was vindication served on Bavarian porcelain. But suspicion has a way of surviving official disapproval. In Singapore, Police Inspector Tan Lee Wei knocked on the door of a shabby office that Wirecard listed as its Asian headquarters. Inside, a single fan rattled above dented filing cabinets. Paper receipts littered the floor. The most recent were months old. Tan photographed empty desks and unplugged servers, then forwarded the images to BaFin, Germany's financial watchdog. Weeks passed with no reply. Bureaucracies, like rivers, choose the path of least resistance. One humid evening, Marsalek invited a circle of hedge fund managers to dinner at a vaulted beer hall. Between courses he displayed scans of bank letters confirming the elusive 1.9 billion euros. The documents appeared immaculate, even embossed. Yet one guest, a seasoned short seller, noticed that both letters used identical phrasing down to an idiosyncratic comma. He returned to London and quietly doubled his firm's bearish position. The tipping point came on June 18, 2020. Wirecard admitted it could not locate the cash that supposedly rested in Philippine trust accounts. By dawn the next day, Braun resigned and was arrested for inflating the company's balance sheet. Marsalek vanished, later rumored to have crossed into Belarus under an alias, carrying Austrian diplomatic passports like spare change. Ernst & Young issued a hurried statement conceding that forged confirmations had slipped through its audit procedures. Francisca Baum, who had once labeled her folder Maybe, stared at news alerts with a grim sense of recognition. In Munich, employees exited headquarters carrying cardboard boxes under television lights. Some mumbled that they had never understood the firm's Asia numbers but felt swept along by a culture that equated doubt with disloyalty. Pensioners who had trusted Wirecard's relentless ascent watched their savings evaporate in 3 trading sessions. The DAX index, which had elevated Wirecard to blue-chip status 2 years earlier, quietly replaced the company with a flavorless consumer goods firm, as if rewriting an embarrassing footnote. During parliamentary hearings that autumn, regulators and auditors traded carefully honed apologies. Lawmakers asked how a 24 billion euro enterprise could hide non-existent cash for half a decade. Explanations, complex subsidiaries, credible management, regulatory blind spots, floated about but never settled. At one session, Francisca testified in measured tones. She described the blurred signature blocks and her unanswered escalation emails. A committee member asked what lesson she drew from the saga. She replied, "If a number feels too convenient, ask why it wants to be believed." Winter draped Munich in silent snow. The once brilliant Wirecard logo was unbolted from the facade, leaving faint outlines like a ghost advertisement on brick. In an empty office, a janitor found a satin presentation binder labeled Vision 2025. Inside, revenue projections soared in perfect diagonals, untouched by human hesitation. He paused, then fed the pages into a shredder that hummed softly, shredding not just paper but the spell those numbers had cast over a continent hungry for its own Silicon Valley. Across Europe, investors recalibrated their regard for friction-free narratives. Startups realized that growth, unverified, could mutate into liability. In London, Dan McCrum penned a reflective column recalling the night he first saw the round numbers. "Great frauds," he wrote, "often succeed because their fiction flatters our need to dream." Far from the spotlight, Francisca accepted a role at a smaller audit firm known for plain talk and slower growth. On her desk sat the old maybe folder, now empty yet kept as a tactile reminder that skepticism, quietly nourished, is an auditor's most faithful instrument. Wirecard entered insolvency proceedings, its remaining assets carved into saleable pieces. The €1.9 billion, once just a line on a balance sheet, was officially declared non-existent, leaving behind not a cent, only caution. And in the vacant parking lot outside the former headquarters, fresh snow-covered tire tracks until all traces looked uniformly undisturbed, mirroring the balance sheets Wirecard had once presented to the world. Pristine, seamless, and perilously smooth. Silicon Valley's Scarlet Promise. The rise and rupture of Theranos. A pale dawn broke over Palo Alto as commuters streamed past a stark, modern building on Page Mill Road. Its facade, a neat lattice of tinted glass, bore a single red droplet logo, Theranos. Inside, young engineers huddled over sleek analyzers dubbed Edison, each machine no larger than a desktop printer. Posters on hallway walls proclaimed a simple pledge: one drop changes everything. Elizabeth Holmes, the company's founder, cultivated an almost mythic calm. She wore black turtlenecks reminiscent of another Valley icon and spoke in a baritone that seemed engineered for gravitas. Her idea, repeated on TED stages and breakfast TV interviews, was disarmingly elegant. A fingerstick of blood could run hundreds of diagnostic tests, replacing vials drawn through needles in cold clinics. The promise tugged at doctors, investors, and anxious patients alike. In 2013, venture titan Don Lucas toured the lab. Holmes guided him past frosted windows into a dim testing bay. Robots whirred softly, pipetting crimson microsamples into cartridge slots. Lucas asked if he might witness the full workflow. Holmes smiled. "Proprietary process," she said, lifting a badge to unlock a door he could not follow through. Lucas left impressed that genius required secrecy. Months later he led a funding round that valued Theranos at $9 billion. Across town, chemistry PhD Erica Chung joined the company, fresh from Berkeley. Her orientation packet listed core values. Belief in miracles sat just below absolute integrity. Yet on her second week she ran a quality control check and saw Edison spit out wildly different potassium readings from identical samples. She flagged the anomaly, only to be told calibration lagged behind innovation. The phrase clanged in her mind, but she saved the printouts in a manila envelope marked QC anomalies. Keep. Public acclaim swelled. Walgreens agreed to install Theranos testing kiosks in hundreds of stores. Former secretaries of state appeared on the board. Generals and senators followed. At a Phoenix ribbon cutting, Holmes clipped a scarlet ribbon while cameras clicked. Beside her stood Sunny Balwani, Theranos president, seldom photographed yet omnipresent. He managed operations with a brusque efficiency, once telling a doubtful engineer, "First they think you're crazy, then you change the world." Yet the machine sulked in retail closets, prone to leakage and cryptic error codes. To meet store deadlines, lab directors secretly ran mini blood samples on off-the-shelf Siemens analyzers, tube-based devices Theranos had vowed to disrupt. Results printed on Theranos letterhead, disguising borrowed technology as in-house magic. Balwani called the workaround bridging. The word sounded almost heroic, like tossing a rope across progress's canyon, but the bridge led back to the very industry Theranos claimed to obsolete. By 2014, whispers reached John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal. He phoned former employee Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz. Tyler described pressure to delete outlier data before presentations. Carreyrou sensed a fracture line, the gap between whispered doubt and public euphoric narrative. He requested interviews. Theranos responded with lawyers' letters heavy as manacles. The legal defense, funded by vast investor capital, seemed designed to exhaust curiosity. Inside Theranos, Chung fed more red ink QC charts into her envelope. She noticed a pattern. Each failure met with a revised, acceptable range, moving the goalposts just enough to turn red flags green. One evening she confided in her colleague Aaron Moore, who replied with a wary glance toward ceiling-mounted cameras. "Walls have ears," he whispered. Both knew confidentiality agreements threatened millions in damages, yet both felt the moral weight of patience depending on truthful numbers. Autumn draped the valley in crisp air when the journal finally published its exposé. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. The article detailed unreliable devices, secret third-party machines, and doctored demos. Holmes appeared on CNBC hours later, eyes unwavering. "This is what happens when you work to change things," she said, invoking Silicon Valley's creed that disruption invites resistance. The share price of credibility wobbled but held. Many saw only a skirmish in the classic battle between innovators and naysayers. Then federal regulators visited the Newark, California lab. Inspectors discovered unqualified technicians authorizing patient reports, critical tests run outside validated ranges, and temperature logs filled after the fact. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services issued a scathing letter threatening to revoke Theranos' lab license. Chung, subpoenaed, turned over her envelope of anomalies. Its contents, once lonely orphans of data, became central evidence. Investors demanded emergency briefings. Holmes presented a new device in development, Minilab, insisting setbacks were temporary. But trust, like glass, once cracked seldom regains transparency. Walgreens froze further rollouts, partner hospitals renegotiated contracts. Lawsuits sprouted like winter weeds. In 2016, regulators banned Holmes and Balwani from owning or operating a lab for 2 years. The sanction felt surgical, precise, near bloodless, yet fatal to the company's heart. Staff layoffs followed. Turtlenecks still appeared at industry conferences, but the baritone voice now met rooms filled with more raised eyebrows than applause. 2 years later, a federal grand jury indicted Holmes and Balwani on fraud charges alleging they had deceived investors and endangered patients. Court filings quoted internal emails. "Norms don't change the world," Balwani had written. Prosecutors countered that norms, accuracy, validation, informed consent, exist to protect lives. Theranos dissolved in 2018, assets auctioned for pennies. In a quiet storage unit, movers found rows of Edison machines. Opening one, they discovered plastic tubing, a few LED indicators, and a circuit board of modest complexity. Hardly the alchemist's box that once dazzled statesmen. The movers shrugged and loaded the relics onto a pallet bound for electronic recycling. Holmes's trial began in 2021. Former employees, doctors, and defrauded investors testified in measured tones. Erica Chung recalled the first potassium misreads, her words calm but unflinching. A defense attorney asked why she hadn't trusted management's assurances. She paused, then replied, "Because the data didn't trust them." A mild winter rain fell on the courthouse steps when the verdict arrived, guilty on multiple counts of fraud. Reporters filed dispatches. Pundits debated the meaning for Silicon Valley's culture of "fake it till you make it." Yet in living rooms across America, patients who once pricked their fingers for Theranos tests felt a quieter reckoning. Numbers printed on glossy reports might have been mirages. Late one evening, Chung walked past the darkened former offices. The red droplet logo had been scraped away, leaving a ghost outline on the glass. She imagined future startups passing that shell, fueled by genuine breakthroughs yet tempted by shortcuts. She hoped they would remember that data, like blood, demands respect. Ignore its warnings and even the brightest promise can clot into ruin. Outside, the streetlights cast steady halos on rain-slicked pavement, ordinary, truthful circles that needed no miracle to shine. The Rogue on the Singapore River, Bering's Bank's final gamble. The January dusk along Singapore's boat quay glimmered with neon reflections when the young English trader stepped out of a taxi and inhaled the humid air. Nicholas Leeson, blonde, bright-eyed, barely 27, had just been promoted to general manager of Bering's Future Singapore. The appointment sounded grand. In practice, it placed him in charge of both trading and back-office settlement for the venerable London Bank's Asian derivatives desk. Separation of duties, the bedrock of financial control, dissolved in that single decision like sugar in hot tea. Inside the beige office tower on Battery Road, Leeson pinned a sheet of paper above his terminal. It bore one cryptic line, error account 88888. Colleagues assumed it was a routine suspense ledger for minor slips. Yet Leeson understood the number's deeper charm. In Chinese superstition, 8 meant fortune. 5 eights promised a fortune squared. He would use the account to park small mismatches, he told himself, temporary patches until markets righted. The patch soon became a tunnel. Tokyo's Nikkei index was drifting sideways when Leeson began placing straddles, bets that volatility would stay tame. Each position felt modest, no bigger than an afternoon wave on the Singapore River. But when Japan awakened to an unexpected interest rate rumor, volatility spiked, and Leeson's straddles bled red. Rather than report the loss, he rolled it into account 88888 and doubled the next trade, hunting a swift reversal. The pattern repeated: loss, concealment, bigger bet. Like a gambler chasing dawn at Marina Bay, he believed the sun would rise on one perfect trade, wiping every slate clean. Back in London, Barings executives thrilled at cablegrams showing steady profits. Leeson's front book, the official positions, appeared prudently hedged, earning tidy arbitrage spreads. He faxed charts signed with cheery, all best Nick. Bonuses flowed. His managers called him the kid from Singapore who had cracked Asia's mystique. No one asked why settlement reports arrived late or why audit requests came back stamped, misfiled, will forward. Distance excused curiosity. 12 time zones wrapped inconvenient questions in tropical night. In November 1994, a minor earthquake trembled beneath Tokyo. The Nikkei shuddered again. Leeson's losses widened past £50 million, all hidden behind the 5 eights. He flew to London for a Christmas party at Barings' ornate Bishopsgate headquarters. Under chandeliers he sipped champagne and accepted applause. A director clapped his shoulder, joking that he should teach their stodgy bond traders how to dance with risk. Leeson smiled, thinking of account 88888 swelling like unseen mold behind an antique painting. New Year's Eve arrived with firecrackers over Clark Quay. Leeson, alone in the office, fed fresh orders into Cimex, Singapore's futures exchange, massive long positions in Nikkei contracts, enough to nudge the market itself. If Tokyo opened higher on January 3rd, the gain could cauterize half his wounds. He keyed the trades, pulse pounding, then stepped outside. The river smelled of soy and diesel. Somewhere a party boat carried expats singing Auld Lang Syne. He heard none of it, only the internal metronome of risk. Fate, indifferent to superstition, delivered the Great Hanshin earthquake on January 17, 1995. Kobe's freeways buckled. The Nikkei plummeted. Leeson's long contracts disintegrated, converting hidden injuries into mortal ones. Losses breached £300 million, yet the front book still showed profit. He sent calm memos. Market turbulence, positions manageable. London believed him. After all, his monthly numbers sparkled. Auditors prepared for their annual visit. Leeson realized the masquerade was nearing its curtain. Still, he chased one last miracle, a short-term straddle timed to an expected rebound. He piled on contracts worth billions of pounds, dwarfing Barings' capital base. The Nikkei flickered upward for a morning, then resumed its slide. The miracle turned inside out. By February 23rd, the hidden deficit reached £827 million, more than twice Barings' available capital. Leeson faxed a short note to his boss: "I'm sorry." Then he left his desk, hailed a cab to Changi Airport, and boarded a flight to Kuala Lumpur. The office lights still hummed over empty terminals, scrolling figures no one yet understood. In London, news arrived like a lightning strike through Edwardian stone. Executives opened the 88888 ledger and saw columns of red stretching to the horizon. Emergency meetings convened at the Bank of England. Merchant banks debated a rescue. But the whole was fathomless for a 233-year-old institution already thin on reserves. On February 26th, Barings Brothers and Company declared insolvency. Monday, commuters found the brass plate on Bishopsgate draped in black cloth. Reporters seized on the optics. A single rogue trader toppling the Queen's Bank. The empire undone not by war or recession but by unchecked ambition under tropical skies. Parliament held hearings where suited directors admitted they had never visited Singapore. Compliance officers spoke of confidence in local management. Each phrase sounded brittle against the magnitude of the ruin. Leeson surrendered in Frankfurt weeks later, exhausted, carrying a paperback thriller and a post-it note with his solicitor's number. Extradited to Singapore, he faced judges in a wood-paneled courtroom smelling faintly of old varnish. He pled guilty to fraud and forgery, receiving 6.5 years in Changi prison. There, mornings began with roll call under fluorescent glare. Evenings ended with the metallic chorus of doors slamming shut, dull, final punctuation to once limitless trades. Baring's remnants sold to ING for one symbolic pound. The Dutch bank absorbed the name, not the soul. Bishopsgate's story dealing room became a conference center. Tour guides in the city pointed at the building and murmured about the dangers of inadequate oversight, their voices respectful, as if discussing a sunken ship. Years later, released and newly cautious, Leeson lectured risk managers about internal controls. Audiences listened, half enchanted, half wary. He spoke plainly: segregation of duties, daily reconciliations, skepticism toward dazzling returns. Yet beneath the calm tone lingered the memory of neon reflecting on water, of trades entered in pre-dawn stillness when the future felt malleable. The lesson landed not as moral sermon but as lived caution. Unchecked belief can bankrupt institutions older than revolutions. On the Singapore River, tour boats passed the former Baring's office each night. Office lights now host ordinary software firms, their logos glowing modestly. Passengers seldom notice a small brass marker near the quay rail, engraved with 5 digits, 88,888, and the words, "Here floated illusion." The river keeps gliding, impartial, carrying reflections of skyscrapers and street lamps alike. It remembers nothing, yet it warns in silence. Fortunes built on hidden ledgers drift faster than anyone can swim. Blackouts in Houston, the Enron illusion. Houston's late summer heat wrapped the city in shimmering haze when the slogan first appeared on downtown billboards, "Ask Why." 3 crimson letters, ENR, glowed behind the phrase, promising a future powered by curiosity. Inside Enron Center, a tower of reflective glass and white granite, traders in rolled-up sleeves crowded around glowing terminals. They spoke in a new dialect: bandwidth swaps, weather futures, dark spreads. Energy, once measured in barrels and pipelines, sounded like software, fluid, infinitely tradable. At the apex stood Jeff Skilling, the cerebral president whose talks dazzled analysts with references to evolution and quantum leaps. He preached a market so frictionless that electricity would flow like bits across fiber optic cables. On earnings calls he delivered quarter after quarter of rising numbers, each punctuated by that trademark chuckle: low, confident, contagious. Shareholders compared Enron's ascent to Microsoft's, only faster. But deep inside the maze of conference rooms, accountant Sharon Watkins noticed a pattern as subtle as hairline cracks in polished marble. Special purpose entities with whimsical names, Choco, Raptor, LJM2, dotted the ledger. Their stated purpose: hedge risk and smooth earnings. Yet the hedges seemed to move losses in perfect sync with executive bonuses. When Watkins raised a brow, her manager repeated the company mantra: "We're the smartest guys in the room." Intelligence in that tower operated like insurance: flash it and questions retreated. 2,000 miles west, rolling blackouts darkened California afternoons. Office buildings fell silent, traffic lights blinked, and local radio blamed generator maintenance. In truth, Enron traders perched on the 6th-floor power desk were nicknaming strategies Death Star and Ricochet, routing electricity out of the state and back in at higher prices. The scheme complied with market rules the traders had quietly drafted in regulatory comment letters months earlier. Over an open line, one operator laughed: "Just keep it under the radar until we max the spread." For California families lighting candles at dinner, the radar was already broken. Ken Lay, Enron's avuncular chairman, toured Capitol Hill, advising senators on deregulation's virtues. His handshake radiated reassurance. Campaign contributions, discreet yet timely, greased hallways. When one aide asked about mounting blackout complaints, Lay waved a hand: "Growing pains, nothing more." He believed it, or convinced himself he did. Watkins's unease sharpened. She compiled a memo to Lay warning that creative structures might implode, shredding trust and equity alike. She slipped the pages into a manila envelope and slid it under his office door, the way a tenant might report a gas smell to a distracted landlord. Weeks passed. Lay summoned lawyers, not auditors. They concluded the memo was internal opinion and advised caution, but not disclosure. Earnings season loomed and Enron's stock, trading above $80, demanded another hit of optimism. Arthur Andersen's audit partners arrived, clutching leather binders. In conference rooms cooled to meet locker temperatures, they reviewed mark-to-market estimates, projected profits booked the instant a contract was signed. One partner frowned at a 10-year Nigerian power deal valued as if oil prices would never fall. Skilling brushed aside the worry. Volatility is opportunity, he quipped. The partner nodded, making a cursory note, then signed the audit opinion with a Montblanc pen provided by Enron's own gift shop. Meanwhile, short seller Jim Chanos ran a back-of-the-envelope calculation. Enron's cash flow from operations lagged reported earnings by billions, an abyss hidden by footnotes. He placed a bearish bet and phoned a Fortune reporter, Bethany McLean, who soon published an article headlined, "Is Enron overpriced?" The piece asked one lethal question: how exactly does Enron make its money? Investors, momentarily dazed, glanced at the price chart, still ascending, and shrugged. Curiosity, it seemed, had an expiration date. Yet markets remember questions longer than answers. By autumn 2001, analysts probed the opaque entities. One afternoon, CFO Andy Fasto met them in a walnut-paneled boardroom. He clicked through slides of nested partnerships and circular guarantees. The more he explained, the murkier the picture grew. When an analyst pressed on debt hidden off balance sheet, Fasto's smile faltered. Stocks dislike hesitation. Enron's began to drift, then sag. October rain lashed Houston windows when the company announced a $1.2 billion equity write-down linked to those same partnerships. Skilling had already resigned for personal reasons, cashing tens of millions on the way out. Fasto was relieved of duties. The smartest guys seemed suddenly mobile, their brilliance unboxed and portable. Credit agencies slashed ratings to near junk. Counterparties demanded cash collateral. In the once raucous trading floor, screens filled with margin calls instead of prices. A trader whispered, "We're watching an avalanche from inside the cabin." By November, rumors of bankruptcy swirled like leaves in the storm drains outside Allen Parkway. Thanksgiving week, employees lined up at on-site ATMs, cards trembling in their hands. Many had retirement accounts saturated with Enron stock, locked during a blackout period ironically named for internal systems upgrades. The screens displayed chilling messages: transaction unavailable. Outside, turkey giveaways proceeded under tents bearing the fading "Ask Why" banners, slogans now bordering on parody. On December 2, 2001, Enron filed the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. The glass tower dimmed, elevators idled, and the rooftop neon logo switched off. One last rolling blackout, this time self-inflicted. Andersen shredded audit papers in a futile bid to preserve reputation. Within months the firm itself dissolved, collateral damage of shared complicity. Congress convened hearings. Lay, his voice frayed, insisted no knowledge of wrongdoing. Skilling sparred with lawmakers denying fraud. Watkins testified in measured cadence, her memo entered into record. At trial years later, jurors heard taped trader jokes about Grandma Millie losing power. The laughter, once cocky, now echoed like guilt in a tiled cell. Lay died of a heart attack before sentencing. Skilling received decades in prison, later reduced but still formidable. Fasto served time, emerging with grayer temples and an apology speech for business schools. Watkins lectured on courage, though she preferred the quieter titles of mother and CPA. Today, the Enron Center houses a multinational oilfield service company. Few visitors notice a faint outline on the marble lobby wall where the original motto once hung. But every June, when Texas heat strains the grid, news anchors recall the manufactured shortages and remind viewers why regulators ask tedious questions. If one walks Allen Parkway at dusk, the skyline still flashes neon promise. Yet in that hush before streetlights hum to life, an unspoken postscript lingers. Brilliance unguided by integrity burns brightest just before it snuffs the lights for everyone else. The milk empire's missing billions, Parmalat's whitewash. A soft dawn mist drifted over the Po Valley as a convoy of refrigerated trucks rolled toward Parma, their sides emblazoned with the blue and yellow logo of Parmalat. To Italian families, those cartons represented wholesome mornings, milk that stayed fresh on the shelf for months, a modern miracle poured over espresso and muesli alike. At the center of it all stood Callisto Tanzi, a courteous man with rimless spectacles who spoke of famiglia and regional pride. From a modest Parma deli, he had built a €7 billion multinational that sponsored Formula One cars and Serie A football alike. The Vatican banked with him. Regional pension funds invested without hesitation. Inside headquarters, a pale concrete building ringed by poplars, Tanzi presided over weekly transparency meetings. Executives gathered around an oval table, sampling Parmalat yogurts while screens projected tidy charts. Revenues rose in gentle, pastoral slopes. Debt appeared small and self-financing. Tanzi would nod, fingertip resting on his temple, and remind them that good stewardship was as vital as good milk. Few noticed the subtlest pause before he closed the laptop, long enough for the last slide, listing offshore cash, to vanish unexamined. 3 floors below, a finance manager named Lucia Bianchi reconciled bank statements. Most accounts sat in local Italian banks, but one, labeled Bonlat in the Cayman Islands, reported €3.95 billion in cash. The amount dwarfed all other balances combined. Bianchi frowned. She had never wired a cent to Bonlat, yet month after month the figure remained serene, verified by a letter from Bank of America's New York branch. The letter bore an authentic logo and flowed in flawless legal Italian. Still, something felt off, like tasting milk that was somehow too sweet. She drafted an email requesting original confirmation, then paused. Her supervisor had once remarked that Cayman liquidity was Papa's rainy day fund. She deleted the draft, closed the ledger, and went upstairs for espresso. Across the channel, at London's Canary Wharf, Merrill Lynch analysts prepared a debt offering to refinance Parmalat's Latin American expansion. They noted high leverage but took comfort in that Cayman cash. One analyst suggested a quick call to the purported custodian bank. A senior banker waved it away. "We're talking investment grade," he said, pointing to Moody's A rating. The offering proceeded, raising €500 million within hours. Investors praised Tanzi's vision. Italian newspapers dubbed him Il Signore del Latte, the Milk Lord. Meanwhile, cracks spread behind the whitewashed facade. Export sales booked to phantom distributors accumulated as paper profits, and debt spiraled into a maze of shell companies. Tanzi's nephew Stefano, newly in charge of football club Parma AC, demanded ever larger sponsorship checks to acquire star strikers. Funds surfaced magically via intercompany loans. In quarterly calls, CFO Fausto Tana answered terse questions with folksy idioms that charmed analysts into silence. Autumn 2003 arrived with a chill wind. A small Milanese hedge fund, SG Capital, shorted Parmalat bonds, noting that free cash flow never matched reported earnings. Seeking proof, its founder, Marco Sorgini, hired a forensic accountant who dialed Bank of America to verify the Cayman balance. The New York clerk, puzzled, could find no record of a Bonlat account. Sorgini wrote a letter to Il Sole 24 or Italy's Financial Daily, hinting at a lactose bubble. The article ran on page 7 and was largely ignored, until December when Parmalat missed a €150 million bond payment, blaming technical wiring delays. The market's trust curdled overnight. Auditors at Grant Thornton demanded sight of the original Bank of America confirmation. Tanzi supplied a faxed copy. The auditors insisted on verification directly from New York. A junior associate called the listed phone number. It rang in an empty Parmalat conference room. Someone had installed a line, complete with recorded greeting, that mimicked an international switchboard. Within hours, Grant Thornton declared the letter spurious. Parmalat's board convened an emergency session under fluorescent lights that made faces appear sallow. Tana confessed that the €3.95 billion never existed. It had been conjured to offset similar-sized debts hidden across dozens of subsidiaries. Tanzi sat motionless, hands folded, whispering Santa Maria Aiutasi. By week's end, prosecutors from Milan's Financial Crimes Unit descended on headquarters, their leather shoes echoing in marble corridors that smelled faintly of warm milk. On December 24th, as Italians prepared panettone and midnight mass, Parmalat declared insolvency, Europe's largest corporate collapse to date, and €14 billion crater. Pensioners clutching dividend statements gathered outside locked bank branches, muttering disbelief. In Parma, factory workers learned from television that their Christmas bonuses were frozen. Truck drivers parked tankers of raw milk on the main piazza in silent protest, the odor of souring cream rising under winter fog. Tanzi was arrested in a modest Bologna hotel, carrying a prayer book and a folded list titled Debiti Veri. He admitted siphoning roughly €1 billion to prop up family ventures and the football club, yet maintained he'd plan to repay it once markets improve. Investigators traced forged documents to a basement print shop producing immaculate stationery from global banks. The forger, when caught, claimed he believed he was making presentation samples. Trial stretched for years. Tanzi received 18 years for market rigging and false accounting. Tana and several auditors followed. Watching from the gallery, Lucia Bianchi recalled the email she never sent and felt a pang of complicity diluted only by relief that truth, however late, had surfaced. She later testified that fear of shaming Papa Tanzi kept employees silent more effectively than any threat. A government-appointed administrator broke Parmalat into a leaner company, stripping non-dairy assets and instituting real bank confirmations, a procedure now nicknamed the Cayman Handshake. The rebuilt firm relisted on the Milan Exchange, modestly profitable, its cartons still crowding supermarket shelves. Yet the new logo omitted the cheerful sunburst that once hinted at boundless growth. Years on, tourists in Parma may visit a small museum dedicated to regional foods. In one corner stands a glass case containing the infamous forged bank letter, yellowing at the edges. The curator explains that milk spoils silently if left unchecked, and so can numbers. Visitors nod, digesting the homely metaphor. Outside, the Pavali evening smells of cut hay and distant dairies. Trucks still rumble toward the highway, engines steady, their cargo honest and perishable. And somewhere, in an archive of courtroom exhibits, that Cayman Facts preserves its cautionary whisper. Even the purest-looking milk can hide a secret bitter enough to sour an empire.